221. Geothermal reaction. The next day, Ted, Jerry, the three gnomes, and their companions, Muradin, Jinli, Clara, and Mr. Shiwaluo, formed a small team to reinvestigate the area where they'd run into the hippogriff. Clara's uncle Mirho was assigned to work at Ironhammer Fortress. If he hadn't provoked the hippogriff with his ill-timed illusion yesterday, they wouldn't have ended up in such a brutal fight. In the end, he wasn't seriously hurt, but he absolutely could not come along today. The other gnome brother, however, had been badly hurt. Yesterday, the hippogriff's lightning bolt had thrown him 3 meters. The fur over his chest had been scorched, and his skin was marked with radial electrical burns. After treatment by the fortress healers, it would still take a week to recover. Ted had given him white essence and healing salve, but the gnome had insisted on finishing his drinks at the gathering before seeing a doctor, truly a man forged of iron and hard liquor. He still couldn't join the investigation. He had to stay and recover. They returned to the site of yesterday's battle and began searching. Ted sent Ansu up to scout. The gnomes produced a number of curious instruments and drilled test holes to check for underground anomalies. Clara brought out a strange magical device that looked like a radar display and began scanning with a steady beeping. It was Ansu, carrying the head-sized instrument and increasing the detection range from the air, who finally found something. Clara examined the green, grid-patterned screen and said, "There's a spot about 1 kilometer to the northwest where the temperature's off." "Temperature's off?" Jerry echoed. "Yes," Clara said. "No other anomalies showed up. That patch is just a few degrees hotter than the surrounding area. Should we go look?" Mr. Shiwaluo stroked his long beard. "We've been searching all morning. That's the only oddity nearby. Let's check it out. If there's nothing, we can rule this area out." They went, and discovered that the oddity was very much real. A sinkhole had formed there, a collapsed mountain cavity, a deep pit carved by long-term crustal movement or underground water erosion. Ansu dropped down about 100 meters and found, at the dim bottom, several glowing fire elements. Unlike stone elements, which are living rock, fire elements are composed entirely of flame. Broad at the top and narrow at the bottom, bright on top and dimmer below, their lower halves resembled inverted cones of dark red gas and floated roughly half a meter off the ground. They ranged from about 1.5 to 1.7 meters tall, some larger, some smaller, and their levels ran from 6 to 9. The bigger, higher-level ones radiated more heat. Ansu also discovered a huge abandoned nest on a ledge halfway down the pit, a 3-meter-wide platform of branches, weeds, and feathers, littered with small bones and copious droppings. It looked like the hippogriff's nest. Hidden on the mid-wall of the sinkhole, it had once been safe, but something downstairs had changed. The fire elements were new neighbors, apparently numerous and fierce, and a fight had driven the hippogriff from its nest. Fleeing upward, it had crossed paths with Clara's group, and Mirho's ill-judged illusion had only enraged it more. They'd paid the price. Ted told everyone what Ansu had seen. Mr. Shiwao, who knew the region well, immediately declared it an anomaly. There had been no fire elements there as of last month. Ironhammer Fortress sat less than a day's travel away. The gnomes had been living and working in the area for 7 or 8 years and knew their surroundings intimately. They'd heard of a flying monster to the east recently, the hippogriff, but nobody had wanted to provoke it. Taking one down would require a team of elites, specialized gear, and a careful plan. It simply wasn't worth the trouble for most folk. Elementals, the gnomes explained, don't behave like ordinary magical animals. They don't migrate wildly. They form where magic accumulates and then stay nearby, slowly growing. The stone elements Ted's group had battled earlier were born of long accumulated magic in a mountain stream. They don't travel far, and their intelligence is very low. Fire elements were similar in that respect. When they appear, they tend to stay put and attack any intruders. If the fire elements had appeared recently, it made sense the hippogriff would be hostile. Who wouldn't panic if their nest's downstairs neighbor was literally on fire? Ted remembered his visit to Ironhammer Fortress the previous day and asked, "Muradin, you said the Great Forge's output has been increasing this last year. Isn't it true you need heat-resistant suits to work there?" "That's right," Muradin said, nearly swearing behind his beard. "It's not that I didn't want to show you. It's that it's truly too hot even for a gnome. After a few minutes, you're soaked as if you'd taken a bath. But it shouldn't be like that, Ted said. We're on the borderlands near the Highlands, not Iceland. How could geothermal activity spike so much in a single year? Muradin explained how the Great Forge drills over 100 meters down and uses rune magic to tap magma, drawing up tremendous heat. It's essentially living thermal energy, a technique that gives the gnomes enormous technological leverage. If exploited on a larger scale, it would be a marvel of cheap, clean energy. We should go down, Ted said. See what's going on. Rappelling into a deep sinkhole is no small thing, even for gnomes who live underground. Ted rigged a rope to string everyone together, cast a feather-light charm on each person, then transfigured small platforms along the cliff edge so Ansu could hold the rope and they could descend in stages. Ted had wanted to float down himself, but the gnomes were terrified of heights. As one complained, "Just give us a quick death. This slow fall is worse." They kept their eyes shut and took 5 or 6 minutes to reach the bottom, sweating all the way. The sinkhole was bottle-shaped, narrow at the top, widening toward the bottom. The opening above was only the size of a human head, letting through a thin coin of light. The bottom chamber, 30 to 40 meters across, was far hotter than it should have been. What should have been damp and mossy was dry. Water channels carved by long flows of water were bone dry, and even the moss had withered. A natural cave entrance sat nearby, and at that mouth several red, orange, golden fire elements drifted as if in a stupor. They counted 6 in total, some smaller level 6 fire elements, a couple of Ember Guardians at level 7, a larger Blazewalker at level 8, and a towering Soul of Flame at level 9. In the dim pit, they were strikingly conspicuous. Mr. Shiwalua looked at them and said, "We'll have to enter that cave and take a look. Prepare for battle." Ted added quickly, "I have a way to inflict enough damage on them. We can't risk a protracted melee. Their large fireballs and burns could cause serious casualties." Fire elements weren't like stone elements. Rock golems could be avoided. You could survive by keeping out of reach. Fire burns, spreads, and can explode. A single touch could produce widespread severe burns. They were far more dangerous than the stone things. Ted planned to strike decisively and end the threat quickly before anyone paid too high a price. 222. Land of Flames. Several fire elements drifted lazily around the cave entrance, basking in the heat that leaked from within. They lacked self-awareness and moved only on instinct, never wandering far from the warmth. Then, from a distance, a fist-sized stone flew through the body of a small fire element. The stone burned as it passed through, emitting green smoke. The temperature here really wasn't low. The struck fire element reared its head and gave a silent roar before streaking toward the source of the throw. The others, startled, followed. In such a cramped space, disturbing one drew them all. Ansu grabbed Ted's shoulder, and they rose into the air. The 6 fire elements were lured into an encirclement, and Muradin, Jerry, and Clara, 3 wizards, unleashed Aguamenti together. It was like 3 water spouts pouring over the elemental cluster. The clear water hissed on contact, turning instantly to steam, and the fire element's glow dimmed. One that had taken a heavier soaking even shrank. From above, Ted began to cast. His wand traced small arcs as he whispered an incantation, moving quickly and precisely. The otherworld knowledge available to an Azeroth cannon fodder mage did not include Blizzard, so Ted could not learn it outright. He had already planned around that, combining a local meteorological curse with his own ice arrow rain to approximate a blizzard. What he used now was an enhanced ice arrow rain. Cold air poured from his wand tip, and dense ice arrows, each about the length of a forearm, formed in the air within a few meters of him. With a sweeping motion, the arrows and cold rushed downward. The rain of ice lasted 10 seconds and sent 60 to 70 arrows tearing through the cavern. The ground turned into a mess of shattered ice that melted and refroze. The 6 fire elements were nearly wiped out. Only a single level 9 fire soul remained, dim and on the verge of snuffing out. Ted finished it with a frost nova. 4,310 experience points gained. The fire elements were dangerous, but particularly vulnerable to opposing elements. If they had been 6 Jackalweir instead, 1 ice arrow rain and a frost nova wouldn't have been enough. Ted watched the loot appear, Two cards dropped: fire particle white, material card, fireproof cloak green, item card, amazing. Mr. Shiwaluo praised. Ted had already shown impressive spell control in yesterday's battle with the hippogriff, but the magic he used now was of a different conception, unexpected even to Muradin and Clara. A little wizard earning such praise from veteran wizards was no ordinary thing. Sherry had been surprised many times along the way and was calmer now. Jinli, the young dwarf, glanced at the axe in his hands with a dawning uncertainty about his own combat ability. When fire elements died, there was almost nothing left, just a pinch of dust. Unlike stone elements, which filled the ground with rubble, there was no battlefield to clear. With Mr. Shiwaluo and Jinli leading, the group pushed into the heat-radiating cave. The passage widened into an easy-to-walk tunnel, winding, but not narrow. The temperature was oppressive, likely above 40 degrees Celsius. Mr. Shiwaluo and Jinli wore steel helms and armor. Even Muradin had on a rune-etched leather breastplate. It felt like standing on a hot plate. Ted cast a frost shield around everyone, which eased the heat for a moment. In this environment, the shield only lasted 3 minutes if it absorbed no damage, so Ted repeated the spell as needed. His mana was plentiful now and recovered fast, so the upkeep wasn't a worry. After about 10 minutes walking, they had covered roughly a kilometer, generally sloping downward. Mr. Shiwaluo, walking at the front with his short-handled hammer at his hip, reached out and touched the cave wall. "The stone here is wrong," he said. "How wrong?" Jinli leaned in to inspect. Mr. Shiwaluo ran a hand along the face of the rock. "This isn't the same rock type we saw in that pit." "Geological fault?" Muradin guessed. Mr. Shiwaluo shook his head slowly. "The difference is too large. I've never seen stone like this." Dwarves lived under the earth and knew stone and ore intimately. If Mr. Shiwaluo said he'd never seen it, it was rare indeed. They pressed on 5 or 6 more minutes, and the air seemed to climb another notch in temperature, close to 50 degrees Celsius. Ted felt a vague, growing certainty. They were getting close to whatever was wrong. A few hundred meters ahead opened a vast underground chamber. They were several hundred meters below the surface, and the space ahead was molten red. The stones underfoot were searing hot. In the cracks between them, dark red magma flowed slowly. The area, as large as several football fields, was riddled with magma pits of all sizes connected by rivers of lava. The surface glossed with dark red magma moved in slow currents. Bubbles rose and burst with wet pops. Occasionally, a 1-meter fire element would be born from the magma, crawl ashore dazed, and stand bewildered. In one brighter pool, a newborn fire element had barely figured itself out when a 15-meter-tall, dark red stone giant loomed and flattened it into a spark that dissipated. The stone giant's body was built of black rocks with veins of dark red magma between them. It had surprisingly detailed features and even a beard, though no neck, giving it a stocky appearance. Its soles were as big as 2 desks, each step leaving a fiery imprint. This was a magma giant, the apex presence in this infernal place. Unlike the mindless elementals, it possessed sufficient consciousness to understand its purpose, to guard the door. At the center of the chamber sat a continuously boiling magma pool. Above it hovered something like a natural magic circle that constantly siphoned in fire-aligned magic in great tides, pouring wave upon wave of power into the pool. A year ago, this had been an ordinary grotto. After the magma pool and that door appeared, the place began to heat non-stop, gush magma, and generate fire-attributed elemental creatures. It kept evolving and accelerating. In the first 6 months, the area was only a quarter of its current size. 6 months later, it had grown more than threefold. The expansion kept speeding up. Now the underground fiery land already hosted over 100 elementals of various ranks. There were flame guards, evolved from larger fire elements, wearing 2 metal vambraces etched with natural magic patterns. Flamewalkers churned and surged with raw energy. Tall, slender lava annihilators made of stone and flowing magma moved at startling speed. Cinder Guardians looked composed of half-burned dark red ash and drifting smoke. A large swarm of small fire elements clustered everywhere, each one a potential evolution once it absorbed enough fire-aligned magic from the pool. The magma pool kept feeding them all, and the chamber pulsed with relentless heat and an uneasy, growing power. 223. Taking a day off. I've been feeling conflicted all week. My backlog of chapters has run out, so I'm taking today off. No excuses. I'm just going to be lazy and rest for a day. Please don't scold me. 2p4. Call people. Call someone. Call people. Call someone. Ted and his group crouched under the invisibility cloak. Each of them wore a safety helmet charm integrated into frost armor to lower their body temperature, and they'd all drunk the fire resistance potion Ted had brewed. Behind a large boulder, they watched this underground world of flame in silence. There were at least several hundred fire elementals of varying sizes. The smaller ones were insignificant, around level 5, easily manageable, but many of the other types looked nasty. Worse, a magma giant wandered in a restricted area at the very center. Judging by its sheer size, this was no ordinary foe. Magma Giant Lenarat, level 10 Fire Elemental, level 5 Elite Unit, level 2 Magma Giant, a level 17 Elite Unit with its own name. That alone was enough to make Ted drop any thought of attacking. It would be suicide. Call for help. Quickly. Contact the Ministry of Magic. Send word to Hogwarts. Get Dumbledore. Ted hissed. Ansu flew off with a cloud-piercing raven. Dumbledore would be here if the message reached him. A few hours later, he did arrive at the temporary camp the gnomes had set up near the deep pit. Ted didn't much care about the ministry. Whether the gnomes notified them or Dumbledore made contact, it wasn't his problem. If not for the experience and the follow-up tasks, he would have left. Ted wasn't a savior. He didn't want that moral burden. He was still a kid. The quest, Explore Mountain Anomaly, completed, granting experience, a material card, and 200 reputation with Dickemond. But the gnomes, using their magical conductance devices to collect data, discovered something alarming. The natural magic circle in the lava pool at the center was actually a doorway. A torrent of fire magic was pouring into this world and beginning to transform it. Even worse, the realm on the other side was seeping through, two bubbles touching and starting to merge. A world saturated with fire magic, likely a landscape of lava, flame, and fire elementals, was infiltrating this world. The surrounding magical environment and ecosystem had already begun to shift. If the fusion continued on a larger scale, entire regions could be turned into active volcanoes. When the gnome arch-artificers reached that conclusion, the system triggered another quest. Block the planar passage. You and your teammates discovered the source of the regional anomaly. A world of flames is seeping into this world. If left unchecked, the entire Britain, the British Isles, and perhaps all of Europe will be unrecognizable. Objective: block the planar passage and stop the fusion of the two worlds. Reward: 1850 experience, 300 reputation with Dickemond, 300 reputation with Ironhammer Fortress, 100 reputation with the Ministry of Magic of Great Britain. Card: Underground Lava River Blue, Essence of Flame. Ted blinked. Could he still leech off quests? On the dwarves' side, Clara took Ginley back to Ironhammer Fortress to report to the elders and the gnome arch-artificers. On the wizard side, Ted wrote a letter and had Ansu deliver it to Dumbledore at Hogwarts. Less than a minute after taking flight, Ansu relayed a message back. The distance made details fuzzy, but the gist was clear. Unknown targets had been detected. Quite a few. And precisely at this moment, Ted poured psychic energy into long-range contact and switched to Ansu's perspective. Several kilometers away, Ansu saw a group of short figures stealthily assembling in the forest and along the mountain's edge below. Goblins. They were well-equipped, robes, leather armor, and a variety of cold weapons. Ted counted 11 or 12 of them. These goblins weren't like the ones he'd seen in Diagon Alley or Gringotts. Their dress and expressions were harsher, more feral. They even had pack animals and mounts. 3 thunder oxen, colossal beasts twice the size of ordinary oxen with massive horns, carried bundles of gear. Thunder oxen were docile and strong, commonly used for heavy loads. Their bodies emitted a low, muffled rumble like distant thunder. The goblins not riding oxen rode large, strange birds. Ted noted the birds varied in size and appearance, but all wore headbands inlaid with red crystals on the back of their heads. The goblins gathered, conferred briefly, then formed ranks and began moving toward the sinkhole where Ted and his group hid. That could only mean trouble. Ted glanced at Jerry and Sherry, then at Mr. Shiwaluo, and said in a low voice, "Mr. Shiwaluo, I'm afraid we've run into trouble." Goblins were an ancient race that had repeatedly vied with wizards for dominance in the magical world. After losing several times over the centuries, they'd retreated from open conflict, but only outwardly. Goblin civilization and social structures persisted everywhere. Gringotts' reach, for example, extended across magical communities of many countries. In short, goblins still wielded substantial influence through their expertise in finance and metallurgy. Within goblin society, there were factions. Some remained staunchly pro-wizard and worked closely with wizarding institutions. Others could not accept goblins' diminished status and harbored plans to overturn wizard rule. The most extreme were the revivalists, rebels who wanted to restore goblin glory and frequently appeared on the ministry wanted lists, operating underground. Then there were the centrists, those who longed for the past but recognized a direct conflict with wizards would be futile. They kept their distance from wizards and often avoided public cooperation. Centrists could be fickle. Many were liable to slip into revivalist behavior at the right moment. Some maintained covert contacts with revivalists, providing funds, intelligence, or cover. Even Gringotts-affiliated, pro-wizard goblins couldn't guarantee there weren't revivalists hiding among them. Controlling currency issuance and exchange, handling the bulk of magical metal smelting, and producing a significant portion of magical items, Gringotts' influence was vast. The other factions would act when opportunity and necessity coincided. This particular goblin party appeared to be a centrist adventuring squad. Some goblins pursued legitimate trade or artisanal crafts, smelting rare magical metals, crafting high-end items, while others roamed the world, recovering ownerless treasures. Wizards called them looting teams. Goblins called themselves explorers and reclamation crews, hunting ancient magical ruins, tombs of great magi, and lairs of rare magical beasts. Whenever there was an unusual fluctuation in the ley lines, these teams were quick to converge and exploit the opportunity. Divination had flagged an abnormal concentration of magic here. The goblins took notice and found the site in less than 3 days. "Stop! What are you doing?" Mr. Shiwaluo suddenly bellowed from a rocky ridge above them. The goblins flinched. They hadn't expected a dwarf to appear on the ridge. The lead goblins exchanged glances. One kicked the strange bird he'd been perched on, stepped forward, and put on a pleasant smile. "We are a goblin caravan passing through. May I ask, Mr. Dwarf, what seems to be the problem?" Mr. Shiwaluo stroked his huge beard and replied gravely, "A goblin caravan? No caravan has been authorized to pass through here. This is Ironhammer Fortress territory. The front is sealed. Entry without authorization is forbidden. Return the way you came." The lead goblin's smile faded. The others behind him wore unfriendly looks. Some muttered curses under their breath about damned dwarves and foreign dogs. The lead goblin and his second exchanged another look, an ugly spark in their eyes. If it were only one dwarf, why not deal with him quietly? Fingers slid toward weapons at their waists and in their cloaks. Mr. Shiwaluo noticed the movement and stiffened, his senses sharp and ready. Just then, Ted's voice rang out. "Mr. Shiwaluo, my raven brought word. Professor Dumbledore received our letter. He says he'll come to investigate as soon as he can, but he has to notify the Ministry of Magic first." Ted stepped forward in wizarding robes, wand in hand. Muradin and Jerry materialized from the trees and joined them. The old goblin, crouched at the base of the rocky rise, slipped his hand into his pocket, made a subtle signal for his companions to hold, kept and chuckled. "All right, this is our first time here. We didn't know. If it's inconvenient, we'll take the long way around." He tugged the reins of his monstrous bird and started back the way they had come. 100 meters later, two of the lead goblins whispered to one another. "Are we really turning back now? The magic readings were huge. This isn't normal. That wizard said Dumbledore might come." "He says Dumbledore will come?" "I know that brat. I saw him in the Daily Prophet. Ted Epiphany. He's a famous Hogwarts student lately." "Still, we traveled 3 days, avoiding the ministry to get here. We can't just leave without seeing what those gnomes found. You go back to the rest point, and I'll disguise myself and scout, see what it really is." "What if it's valuable?" "Then we cannot be blamed. Dumbledore won't be able to stop me." Unseen by them, a translucent 1/3 size invisible servant floated along, trailing the group. Ted had already overheard everything through that construct. 10 minutes later, the old goblin, now changed and disguised in a ridiculous local hood that looked like a paper bag with two eye holes, crept around toward the group. The hood's comic look belied its purpose. It was a magic item that could block many detection spells and carried a faint aura that unsettled the mind. The old goblin always wore it when he planned dirty work. He wore other artifacts too, a papal amulet from Italy to boost his magic resistance, an obsidian sacrificial knife from the Aztec lands, a superb tool for the dark arts, Spanish bullhide trousers that, once triggered, granted temporary bovine strength, even a Japanese omamori charm. His cloak shimmered with a disillusionment charm, a device a notch below a true invisibility cloak. Ordinary invisibility cloaks woven from Demiguise's hair fade with time. Only the Potter family's cloak is said to retain its power for centuries. That's why it became a hallow. With this patchwork of gear, even Merlin himself would have a hard time placing his origin. He was one of the more radical figures among the moderate goblins, known for leading treasure hunts into ruins and for having contacts among the revivalist extremists. He wasn't especially powerful personally, but his years of leading teams through dangerous sites had earned him influence. He had the scars to prove it, 7 or 8 major ones across his body. Somehow he'd always come back alive. This time, however, he failed. Ted had watched him the whole time. First, the old goblin didn't detect the invisible servant, a construct of mental power mixed with a touch of magic. Then he walked straight into the trap Ted had laid. Frost Blast, a silencing charm. Ansu's dark domain. Then Ice Arrow Rain, triple cast. The old goblin fought back. He had many survival charms and bidden devices. Magic flared as he resisted and even cast non-verbally with an odd wand. But the ambush was complete. The pit he'd stepped into wasn't just mud. The surrounding muck was an earth golem. At the decisive moment, the golem threw a fist the size of a wash basin, and something cracked, bones breaking. The next wave of Ice Arrow Rain cut through his defenses. Thick, forearm-long arrows struck him again and again. He froze, shattered, and a whirlwind came to sweep the remains away, bone to dust in a brutal, efficient finale. Ted didn't bother to analyze every artifact on the body. He pulled on dragonhide gloves, scooped the useful items into his spatial bag, and retreated. When the old goblin fell, the rest of his team, several kilometers away, found out immediately. They kept a magical parchment that recorded names. When a name disappeared, it meant the person was gone. They wanted revenge, but before they had gone far, a long-range message arrived. Minister for Magic Fudge was heading to the same place with a large entourage, and Dumbledore had been seen. The remaining young leader ground his teeth and shouted, "Retreat! I'll remember this! I'll avenge my uncle!" One of them swore as they withdrew. Later, Ted sat opposite Dumbledore. "That's my experience," he said. "This is the situation now. It's blown up worse than we thought." Ted recounted everything from Dickemond up to the present, carefully omitting the fact that he'd killed the old goblin. That remained his secret. Dumbledore listened, eyes drifting to the dwarf and gnome laborers nearby hauling supplies. The dwarves relied on sheer muscle. The gnomes had primitive magic-powered transport, exoskeleton-like automata, rudimentary golems that required a single operator to steer them. "I'll brief Fudge," Dumbledore said. "This is no small matter. If it's not handled quickly, it could become very dangerous." Ted shrugged. "I still advise you don't say too much to that idiot. Every extra word he hears, he'll take it as a threat to his position." Dumbledore shook his head. "It doesn't matter. I can't be preoccupied with his insecurities right now." It was in character for Fudge to be touchy. Dumbledore didn't think highly of him. Fudge lacked backbone, and any capable senior ministry figure arriving to oversee an operation would look like a challenge to his authority. Dumbledore had anticipated this and had personally sent the letter. By evening, Fudge arrived with a substantial party from the ministry, 30 people or more, including several senior officials and department heads. His face showed all the discomfort of a man who'd been forced into attendance. Confronted by dwarves in helmets and armor, and gnomes with strange devices and golems at their side, Fudge's expression soured further. For a moment, the thought that Dumbledore might be leading a dwarf rebellion flickered across his mind. "Dumbledore, I'm here," Fudge announced, sweeping a hand toward the officials behind him. "I don't know what's got you alarmed, but I sent people right away." Thank you for your prompt response, Dumbledore replied. This is a serious matter. Coincidentally, some people I invited have just arrived. Before he finished, magic rippled in the air, and 7 or 8 apparition points opened. Figures shimmered into being. Sirius Black, his wife Olivia, Professor McGonagall, a stout veteran with a wooden leg and a magical eye, undeniably Mad-Eye Moody, and a tall, refined-looking middle-aged man who could only be Remus Lupin. Ted didn't know all of the others well, but many in the Ministry greeted them with obvious respect. Fudge's face went even paler. He had been outmaneuvered. Sirius and his wife carried considerable weight among the pureblood families. Professor McGonagall, as Hogwarts headmistress, commanded deep loyalty from many present. Mad-Eye was the great elder of the Aurors. Though retired, his prestige among Aurors far outstripped Fudge's. The others weren't ordinary either. Sturgis Podmore, a man known in magical materials trade with European connections, Daedalus Diggle, the excitable adventurer, and Elphius Dode, short, bald, and over 100 years old, Dumbledore's old classmate, a well-known scholar and public figure in wizarding circles. It had taken some persuasion to get Doge out in the field at his age. Seeing such company arrayed with Dumbledore left the minister with nowhere to hide. 226. Order of the Phoenix from the Ashes? People whispered that Dumbledore had once founded an Order of the Phoenix that had played a decisive role against Lord Voldemort. Although the Order hadn't been in the news for years, most believed it hadn't simply disappeared with Voldemort. It still operated in the shadows. Now, looking at the newcomers, it seemed at least some of them must be members. Fudge scrutinized the arrivals with exaggerated care, intending to remember every face for future special attention. What he didn't know was that among the Ministry personnel he led were several actual Order members. Beside him stood Kingsley Shacklebolt, of the Shacklebolt family and an Auror captain, who had joined Dumbledore's circle long ago and counted Arthur Weasley among his close friends. Amelia Bones, with her stern expression and the same severe look that could be mistaken for Professor McGonagall's anger, was there too. Her brother Edgar had been a founding member of the Order before the Death Eaters slaughtered the Bones family. She'd never married, carried that hatred with her, and though she hadn't formally joined the Order, she was a natural ally of Dumbledore. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Amelia was also the most powerful candidate to succeed Fudge as minister, a common pattern in Ministry politics that Fudge privately dreaded. Fudge's fear of Dumbledore made sense in a way. Dumbledore could overturn the table at any time. In this small British wizarding community, Dumbledore's influence loomed large. More importantly, Fudge knew his own shortcomings and had little to show for his tenure. That insecurity made him paranoid and hypervigilant. He treated Dumbledore as an imagined enemy he could not help watching. Evening had fallen. Magical lanterns, torches, and bonfires lit the hastily assembled camp. Supply crates lay scattered. There weren't many tents, so most people sat outside talking. In the largest tent, where Fudge, Amelia, and Kingsley represented the Ministry, Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Moody represented the Order, and 3 dwarves, 3 gnomes, and the ox-horned strongman Iron Hoof from Decamond rounded out the company. 13 people debated the crisis. You mean the whole of Britain could be in danger because of this? Fudge's voice shot up. The Aurors and Ministry witches nearby exchanged glances. Their plastered minister was being his usual dramatic self. Inside the tent, the gnome Grand Craftsman Geltok pushed his glasses up. "Oh no, Minister, you misunderstand." Fudge sagged with relief and adjusted his tie. "I meant that if we fail or ignore this, soon all of Europe could suffer. We've modeled the growth of this flame magic. If this flame gate is not contained, in at most 3 months this area will be a boiling lake of lava. In a few months more, Scotland and England could be torn apart, geographically. The British Isles might split, eventually sinking large parts of the islands and devastating the European ecosystem." Fudge's eyes nearly bugged out. He sounded terrified and half convinced he was being tricked. Ted, listening to the dwarves' magically recorded data, knew 3 months was optimistic. The growth curve was exponential. Mid to late-stage environmental changes could trigger cliff-like collapses. How much of the other world would leak through was unknown, but splitting the British Isles with a vast volcanic zone in the middle seemed inevitable. Worse still, if it linked with underwater volcanoes, it could obliterate all of Europe. Outside the tent, Sirius chatted with Ted. Sirius admired Ted deeply. Power, wit, warmth, loyalty, daring, maturity, qualities Sirius had envied and aspired to. He introduced Ted proudly to his nearest friends in the Order, especially Remus Lupin. "Allow me to present him properly." Sirius straightened in mock ceremony. "Remus, my closest friend, Mr. Remus John Lupin." "Mooney of the Marauders," Sirius whispered theatrically, covering his face. He already knew the Marauders' map was now in Ted's hands and was delighted at the inheritance, having even toasted to it. "Hello, Mr. Lupin." Ted shook Lupin's hand. The moment their skin met, Ted felt a strange jolt, the same sensation the material card Wild Green had given him, the same feeling that came from the ingredient cards dropped by a jackalwere. Lupin seemed to sense it too. He released Ted's hand quickly and smiled with a touch of nervousness. Sirius didn't notice and went on introducing Ted. "For some reason, Remus is working with Muggles now. What's it called?" he fumbled. "A private detective," a woman interjected, defending her husband. "Thanks to your funding, he opened a detective agency." Mrs. Olivia's explanation made Lupin smile wryly, while Sirius waved it away as no big thing. Ted glanced from Sirius to Lupin and said carefully, "Perhaps it's presumptuous to speak so plainly, but in the same way you and Remus are close, Sirius, my relationships with Harry and Neville are the same. You are all members of the Order." He nodded toward the tent. "So I won't beat around the bush." Sirius, not a fool, understood the implication and patted Ted on the shoulder. "Say what you need to. Remus and I are with you." Ted continued, "Have you read the last 2 issues of Potion Secrets?" Sirius and Lupin exchanged puzzled looks. Mrs. Olivia, who knew about potioning, smiled and explained, "It's a specialist magazine circulated among potioneers, cutting-edge work and conjectures in the field." "How did you get access?" she asked Ted. "We have to thank Professor Snape," Ted said with a smile. Sirius burst out laughing. Ted shrugged. "Professor Snape's potion skills are impressive. Under his teaching, my potions have improved, and I've even published a few articles in Potion Secrets. I know some of the authors." He leaned toward Lupin. "One of them, Potion Master Damocles Belby, has, after years of work, developed a wolfsbane potion." All 3 men went quiet. Ted added, "The potion lets werewolves keep their sanity through the full moon, although—" That, Lupin had to steady his breath. "Mr. Belby, how do I contact him?" They all understood then that Ted had already discovered Lupin's lycanthropy. How he'd found out they didn't know, but the news and the wolfsbane report had clearly shaken Remus. Nearby, a young woman strained to hear the conversation, but Ted, cautious by habit, had cast a silent muffliato so no one could eavesdrop. The young woman was Nymphadora Tonks. She'd been an Auror trainee when Ted and his friends started school, the only recent graduate that year to be assessed and accepted, and she was a metamorphmagus. Unlike an animagus such as Professor McGonagall, who turned into one specific animal, a metamorphmagus could alter facial features, hair color, and even body shape at will, shifting into another person's appearance without magic or potions. Tonks was expected to become a full Auror that year. The discussion in the tent was still heated. Some people in the Ministry of Magic, represented here by Fudge and in effect speaking for the pure-blood families, were far from enthusiastic. Even after the gnome Grand Craftsman had laid out the worst-case scenario, a few faces still wore the same stubborn disbelief. "Really? I don't buy it." It was a familiar, uncomfortable feeling. Then Dumbledore stood up. "Before I came," he said, "I visited a few old friends. One of them was Cassandra." Conversation died instantly, partly out of respect for Dumbledore, partly because the Cassandra he'd named was Cassandra Vablatsky, author of Unfogging the Future, an Eastern European seer, perhaps 100 years old, and one of the few genuine prophets in living memory. If Dumbledore had gone to a diviner, people wanted to know what she'd said. She said, "A disaster is coming for all of England. It's like walking on eggs. One wrong step, and it's over." That was the final push. Dumbledore's words finally carried the day. Even Fudge and the ministry officials he represented relented. Politics, after all, is a game of responsibility. If Dumbledore believed the dwarves and gnomes and Fudge refused to act, Fudge would be the one to blame if things went wrong. Better to compromise than to gamble with an entire country. Because it was urgent, they mobilized that very night. After Dumbledore had spoken with Ted and tested the potions he'd brought, he sent for Professor Snape. "These are the fire resistance and frost protection potions Ted developed," Dumbledore told him. "They work very well. Severus, I need a large quantity, now." Snape's expression soured at the mention of that student's formula, but Dumbledore's tone was uncharacteristically solicitous, and the matter felt unusual. "How many?" he asked, "and the ingredients must be guaranteed." "At least 50 bottles, more if possible. Work out the details with Ted." 50 bottles? Snape muttered. "Are we bathing in potion? I knew it was unreliable. Bloody unlucky formula. Worse than dragon dung." Ted, respectful of his professor yet patient, listened to the complaints until Snape had vented, then explained the two potions. "The fire resistance is a strengthened burn-healing draught. I added fire flowers and fire lizard scales. The frost protection needs a new spell I developed. You can prepare the base liquid, and then Jerry and I will enchant it." Ted had already asked to bring Hermione, Harry, and Neville along. The enchantment, he said, required the special incantation only his companions knew. Dumbledore hesitated. Letting a student lead an operation was risky, but Ted argued, "Professor, I understand wanting to protect the students, but young wizards can't grow without experience. Helping from the rear this time is a rare opportunity, and this concerns the whole British Isles. They have a responsibility." Sirius, standing nearby, spoke up for his adopted daughter. Dumbledore still worried about exposing third years, but Ted's plea, "Young wizards cannot grow without experiencing things," moved him. The boy who lived and his friends needed more than ordinary classroom training. In the end, Dumbledore agreed. That night, the students were brought by Ministry members via apparition. Before they could even steady themselves, Fudge launched into a long, breathless speech, 10 minutes of ministerial obligation. "As the Ministry, we must, and furthermore, and also." Preparations that night were frantic and chaotic. The wizards were inexperienced at organizing an operation this large. They were exhausted and often ineffective. Still, Ted worked almost nonstop. Even with Snape directing 6 or 7 potions masters to assist, producing the fire resistance and frost protection draughts kept him busy for hours. He also proposed an alchemy array tactic he called gradual encroachment, frost advance. Meanwhile, the wizards, dwarves, and gnomes weren't idle. They sent several small teams to probe the land of fire, to test the enemy and the environment. What they found was brutal. The air hovered near 50 degrees Celsius, like being inside a cripplingly hot bath. Exposed skin reddened within 10 seconds. Weaker members of the party struggled to breathe. Leather boots softened within minutes and began to stick to the ground. The scorching heat alone cut a wizard's effective combat power by a third. Fire element creatures weren't always individually powerful, but they were deadly. Fire and lava were constant hazards. Many fire monsters detonated on death. During one reconnaissance, 6 wizards were struck by glowing, superheated debris. Ted stabilized them, mixing white essence with frost oil, then insisted they call St. Mungo's so the injured could be evacuated and treated properly. Ted's face during the night had been a study in frustration. The operation felt like playing a game with 4 brain-dead teammates. Every sensible tactic was undermined by chaos. Fudge paced, delegated, and sweated, appearing important but making the situation worse. Dumbledore eventually sent him away to calm things down. Fudge was mortified. Ted wanted to shake him and shout, "Look at yourself. Are you micromanaging this?" But there was no time for theatrics. "Ted, it's all up to you," Sirius told him at the lip of the sinkhole, where he led 2 teams of 10 wizards. Ted could hardly contain himself. Overnight, the Ministry had delivered mountains of magical materials. Goblin-forged silver, enchanted reagents, enough wealth he'd never seen assembled for a single battle. His plan hinged on the alchemy array, to use the melted goblin silver and the array's power to push the cold in, blunting the Land of Fire's heat. On the ground, the goblin silver melted slowly inside Ted's array. Molten metal flowed along the array's channels. Runes along the border began to glow and hum. After 10 minutes, Ted pretended to be exhausted, drinking a couple of mana-restoring potions for show, then stood up, pale but steady. "It's ready. When you go in, place the materials exactly on the markings and repel the monsters. Once the array spreads, it will lower the temperature enough for us to fight." Sirius nodded and led the vanguard into the scorched land to establish a foothold. The wizards left behind watched Ted with mingled awe and disbelief. Potions, alchemy arrays, runecraft. Had Hogwarts always been this competitive? None of them had learned half of these techniques in their 7th year. Behind him, Hermione, Harry, and the others were already working, assisting Ted as he activated the array and prepared the enchanted potions that might make the difference between victory and catastrophe. 228. Dumbledore strikes. Sirius and the others squeezed into the cave and pressed forward. The ambient temperature quickly began to climb. Sirius produced a test tube-shaped crystal vial. Inside, a silvery potion swirled like mist. It felt icy to the touch. He wiped sweat from his brow. I think it's time to drink this stuff. Gulp, gulp, gulp. Ugh, Snape's potions are never something to look forward to, someone grumbled. Despite the complaints, the ice armor potion worked. A thin shell of shimmering ice sprang up around each of them like a magical shield, and the frontline wizards immediately felt something cool. As the vanguard pushed forward to scout, more forces filed into the sinkhole behind them. Professor McGonagall and the older members of the Order of the Phoenix arrived, along with Aurors and Ministry hit wizards, led by Moody, all preparing for the fight. Hermione leaned toward Ted and whispered, I think some of them are nervous. Ted shrugged. No choice. They haven't faced this kind of battle. Ron piped up, I'm a bit nervous too. Can I go to the bathroom? You've already gone 3 times, Jerry snapped. The last large-scale battle among wizards had been more than 10 years ago. Many of those old Aurors were gone. 8 out of 10 Aurors now were new recruits. They had faced dark creatures and rogue wizards, but never anything like this. Dozens of wizards gathered together in sustained combat. If you counted the supporting demi-humans, dwarves, and gnomes, the entire force, combat troops, and logistics, numbered over 300. For wizards, it was a small war. Hearing that they were up against strange, otherworldly fire elements made them even more uneasy. Ted didn't concern himself with their nerves. He and his companions kept an eye on the ground runic pattern of the alchemy array. Dumbledore had told him not to overexert himself, promising he could shield his students for a while. But Ted felt the alchemy array might end up playing a decisive role. Sirius and the others breathed easier after destroying 2 fire element creatures. The heat made every breath feel like swallowing embers, and these creatures were hard to kill. Ted's assessment was grim. The fire elements had a degree of magic resistance, level 1 or 2, some even level 3. Incendio did nothing but massage them. Aguamenti was largely ineffective in that environment. Spells like Defindo or bone-shattering charms struggled to finish them because these beings lacked flesh and blood. Those spells blasted away scorching rocks, cleaved flames, or sent up dark, viscous magma. It usually took 4 or 5 wizards casting repeatedly to reduce an elemental to ash or a pile of slag. The vanguard had only held a 200-square-meter foothold on the edge of the Land of Fire and were already exhausted. Their magic burned through quickly. The ice armor's duration was drastically shortened. Once the cooling effect faded, the heat overwhelmed them in seconds. Fortunately, the elementals weren't clever. They ignored the small group unless provoked. If a larger force turned their attention, holding the position would have been impossible. Sirius's voice crackled over the comm. We've established a foothold. Come on over. But these things are a real pain. A dozen dwarves in rune-etched armor were first through the cave. Their plating bore runes that resisted fire and lessened the heat's impact. Professor McGonagall followed with a group of wizards, and some gnome artificers wearing magic-conducting rigs came next. They were to build a proper stronghold in the Land of Fire under the dwarves' protection. Seeing Dumbledore leading a contingent of Old Order members into the cave, Ted told his friends, "Watch the alchemy array here. I'll go in and take a look." Dumbledore bent forward in the tunnel. He was very tall and saw Ted at the end of the line. He said nothing. Ted needed to enter and link the inside and outside portions of the alchemy array. The outside array would be the operating matrix. The interior array would be the effect matrix. It was a delicate job only he could do. When Ted emerged into the Land of Fire, the battle was still raging. A dozen wizards, backed by dwarves, were engaged with several large fire elementals. One was a lava annihilator, a level 12 elite. Its sweep sent geysers of lava spraying, scattering the defenders. Sirius and Snape held the front line, jointly restraining the beast with binding spells. Their rivalry was still visible. Professor McGonagall glared at them, then transfigured the terrain to pin the monster. Ted had no time to study the dwarves' rune work or the gnomes' devices. He had to construct the inner alchemy array. Silver magic pooled in his hands like putty, flowed like liquid metal, and under his wand's guidance spread across the ground in geometric patterns and runes. Dumbledore stood slightly apart, motionless, eyes narrowed as he studied the space. Everything was red, as if they stood inside a furnace. Hundreds of fire elementals, large and small, scoured the landscape. He noticed a magma giant guarding a central lava pool, a 10-meter-tall figure of molten rock with a beard-like lava pattern and distinct facial features. It stood by a spatial gate that led to another world, from which fiery magic pulsed continuously. Casting aguamenti or freezing spells in that place was punishingly difficult and costly. Even with dwarves in front and the gnomes back, devices forming a network defense, progress was slow. The heat forced everyone into a sweat. Only Dumbledore remained dry, his long beard stirring though there was no breeze, his eyes glittering with magic. He was watching the gate. If the gate couldn't be closed, everything would be for naught. After 20 minutes, the first wave of dwarves and wizards was spent and withdrew. The second wave took their place. It wasn't just the combat, it was fighting in a sauna. No one could endure long. Then Ted shouted, elated, "It's done!" He was drenched in sweat, his robes were discarded, and his shirt clung to him, but he had finished the connection. Alchemy array established! Activate! The silver patterns on the ground began to glow with a low hum. The complex design expanded, magic flowing through it and up the line toward the cave. The external fire magic poured into the array, churned within it, and with Ted at its core, transformed into frost. It was like an air conditioner turning on in the middle of a furnace. Cool mist spread, and a 500 or 600 square meter area chilled instantly. It wasn't the full cleared zone, but it eased the frontline fighters and gave them a place to retreat and rest. If the array's range could be expanded, its effect would grow accordingly, limited only by the array or by Ted himself. This reduced the disadvantage of losing the terrain advantage. "Well done, Ted," Sirius said, his beard curling in a smile. Snape turned away, wiping his face with disgust. Professor McGonagall smiled and raised a stone wall to block an attack. Dumbledore glanced at Ted, nodded once, then went back to watching the gate. Spellcasting and the dwarves' shouts echoed ahead. But the deeper they pushed, the more powerful and numerous the fire elementals became. Outside in the sinkhole, Hermione and the others noticed the change. "Ted activated the array," she exclaimed. "How is it?" Ron asked. "Is it okay?" Jerry pressed. "Working fine. Only," Hermione began. "Only what?" Neville asked. Hermione judged the reserves by current consumption. "Only the supplies. At this rate, 3 hours, maybe. 3 hours. If Ted lacked his unequal exchange, orange, talent, their consumption would have been 10 times worse. Because he was the array's core, converting fire magic to cold with his own body, the array could achieve what the mechanism alone could not. This was the land of fire. Lava was only meters beneath their feet. Turning on an air conditioner in a furnace was almost absurd, and yet Ted's direct conversion of heat into cold made the difference. An hour later, several wizards had already fought 2 rounds and couldn't continue. More reinforcements were requested, more wizarding families and ministry troops, at least 50 more. Most of these wizards had never endured such sustained, high-intensity combat. In wizard duels, 5 minutes was long. Here they were casting continuously for 15 or 20 minutes and feeling their magic drain. Injuries began to mount. 30 minutes later, another relay took over. By the time they had cleared about 3,000 square meters and began meeting large numbers of high-level fire elementals, Dumbledore moved. He raised his wand. His hair and beard stirred, though there was no wind. He chanted a long, rapid spell. The wide sleeves of his robe slid down to his elbows, revealing forearms that were thin and shriveled. He was a centenarian. The incantation took 30 seconds to complete. When it ended, he lowered his wand toward the alchemy array under Ted's feet and spoke the final note. Corresponding changes. 229. Master the change. The ground under their feet trembled. The black rock, scorched by heat and only recently cooled by Ted's alchemy array, shuddered and bulged. Then a massive stone figure rose up. Its head alone was 2 meters across. Silver-white patterns traced across its body, Ted's alchemy array. The construct was 20 meters tall, but only an upper torso. Attached to its back, unmistakably, was Ted's cooling alchemy array. Dumbledore had transfigured part of Ted's device into his creation. In this furnace-like land of fire, the black stone's surface exhaled cold air and was rimed with a thick layer of ice. Ted gaped. His alchemy array, his invention, had been used by Dumbledore. The old wizard had reshaped it and grafted it onto his transfiguration, importing its fire-to-ice conversion. He'd created an ice stone giant in the middle of this inferno. "Holy crap," Ted muttered. The half-body colossus slid forward like an earth golem, its heavy steps sealing molten flows into black rock. Minor monsters were swatted aside with a single punch or sweep of its arm. Creatures that had required 2 dwarves to hold and 3 or 4 wizards to blast into bits were now knocked aside like insects. The ice stone giant's cold breath chilled the ground beneath it, leaving a trail of ice as it moved directly toward the door at the heart of the land of fire. Everyone stared. As expected from the greatest white wizard of the age, Dumbledore dominated the battlefield with his opening move. He'd even made use of Ted's alchemy array. With the minor creatures neutralized, only the 15-meter magma giant remained. Ted's thoughts snapped to the practical. Damn it, this was a perfect chance to leech experience. Dumbledore might take the lead attack, but free experience was still free. Lupin, standing beside him and counting on Ted as the new hope, grabbed his arm. "Ted, it's dangerous. Don't go. You've done more than enough. Your alchemy array was crucial. Even Dumbledore borrowed it." Lupin tried to dissuade him gently, praising what Ted had contributed. It wasn't hyperbole. Ted's potions and the alchemy array were the equivalent of dozens of wizards. Without the ice armor potion and that cooling array, they wouldn't have made such fast progress. But Ted shook his head. "I can help. Don't worry." Before Lupin could argue, Sirius said, "Let him go. He knows what he's doing." Lupin only sighed and let go. At that moment, a young Auror approached, Tonks, Sirius's grandniece. "Mr. Lupin, thank you for saving me earlier," she said. "You're welcome," Lupin replied with a smile. "Even if I hadn't, someone would have stepped in." Ted had already decided how he'd leech. He needed a broad, low-intensity contribution, something that would reach a huge area so he could pick up experience from many small creatures. The ice stone giant's arms were nearly 20 meters long. A single sweep would obliterate anyone: lava annihilators, flame guards, firewalkers, levels 11, 12, 13. No one would survive. All he needed was an assist he could siphon. He raised his wand. Enhanced Cyclone. In his other hand, the azurite and blue crystal turned to powder and spun into the air on the magic from his wand tip. A cyclonic cloud formed. This was a meteorological curse boosted by materials. Performing such a curse in a turbulent, blazing environment was difficult, and several wizards watching were impressed by how well Ted had shaped the storm. Sirius, thinking quickly, raised his wand and added his power, expanding the cloud's range and density. Lupin, Miss Olivia, Professor McGonagall, and many of Ted's allies joined in. Snape even lifted his wand, scowling. The meteorological curse's coverage ballooned tenfold, blanketing almost half of the land of fire. The magma giant at the edge of the lava pool turned its head at the sudden weather shift. Buoyed by the support, Ted became more confident. Multiple freezing spells, frost stars, ice arrows, he fed one spell after another into the rotating cloud mass, and using the alchemy array beneath their feet as an energy sink, pulled a cool wind across the field. Blizzard. Light at his wand tip flared like a searchlight. Under his guidance, palm-sized ice shards and forearm-long ice arrows rained down from the clouds across half the land of fire. Many melted midair or vaporized on impact where the heat was fiercest, but it was still devastating to fire elementals. The creatures tried to cluster and resist, only to be flattened by the ice stone giant's swinging arm. The blizzard couldn't cross the central lava pool. The heat there was too intense, but that didn't matter. Ted's goal was to clear minor monsters and soak up experience, not to bait the boss. Dumbledore, however, had no intention of stopping. He extended his wand and guided the ice stone giant toward the magma giant. As the two closed within 100 meters, frost met searing heat and turned to steam, reducing visibility. The magma giant, which had been a silent sentinel until now, finally reacted. It roared, not like any animal, but like wind howling from a cavern, and charged. A dozen meters away, it stomped. The ground split, winding fissures spewed lava toward the ice stone giant. Ted noticed Dumbledore's eyes were calm, and his wand barely moved. The cooled array on the construct's back, transfigured in ways Ted couldn't fathom, began to glow. Suddenly, Ted's blizzard shifted. The scattered shards and cones condensed in midair, coalescing into monstrous ice spears a meter long. Dozens, then hundreds of massive javelins shot through the steam toward the magma giant. The sight was breathtaking. A tight sensation ran through Ted's body. He realized Dumbledore was using him as a relay, channeling great quantities of converted fire energy through Ted's storm and into the array on the giant's back to amplify the ice effect. The ice stone giant spewed a white, freezing breath. The spreading lava and cracks instantly solidified into black rock. After that, most of the others could only watch. Wizards continued to help with the meteorological curse. Every 30 seconds, Ted would push a 1-minute wave of blizzard, but none could change the direct fight. The two 20-meter titans clashed with earth-shaking force. A single ordinary spell couldn't even chip their stone. From a distance, they could clear the smaller elementals and lava-formed minions, but the main battle was Dumbledore's show. His transfiguration, raised to a level no one could fully comprehend, steadily wore down the dark red magma giant. Chapter 229, Stealing a Kill. Ted assisted Dumbledore with the others, playing the role of a secondary assistant. He waited until the magma giant finally began to falter before making his move. That over 10-meter behemoth had been terrifying, so huge and mechanical in its motions that a single attacker could never have brought it down. Every step produced earthquakes, every swing sent magma explosions through the cavern, as if mountains were crumbling. It was also incredibly resilient. Even after being pummeled by Dumbledore's ice stone giant, it had taken more than 20 minutes before showing signs of weakness. If it had simply stood there and let Ted hit it, it might still have taken hours to finish it off. Fortunately, Dumbledore was powerful. In the late stage of the battle, he had used the ice stone giant to pummel the magma giant while simultaneously dual casting with his other hand, raising an enormous stone hand from the ground to seize one of the magma giant's legs and hold it in place. The ice stone giant, aided by Ted's alchemy array, continuously drew in fire element magic and converted it into its own ice element power. With Dumbledore's enhancements, it only grew stronger as the fight dragged on. Steam hissed, shattered rock flew, and the clash of ice and fire turned the cavern into a roiling, steamy wreck. Now the magma giant was wounded and shedding black stone chunks, lava flowing like viscous blood. It was clearly weakening, on the verge of collapse. For the past half hour, Ted had been using his blizzard to mop up the smaller fire element creatures with everyone's help. Now the battlefield was nearly clear. It was his chance to steal the kill. Ted raised his left hand, clenching it as if gripping something, then pulled it down fiercely. The swirling dark clouds over the cave descended like a massive quilt at his gesture, blanketing both giants. The alchemy array beneath Ted's feet, linked to the ice stone giant ahead and to Hermione and the others back in the sinkhole, flared. Every rune and channel erupted in light, the array's materials melting, and then converging along the ice stone giant's back to feed the blizzard vortex that had been descending. A pale blue, violently freezing surge poured out, instantly encasing both of the towering stone giants in a shimmering block of crystal-clear ice. Ted pointed his wand and shouted, "Shatter ice!" Countless cracks laced the block of ice. With a deafening crack, the colossal, mountain-like ice ruptured and shattered into glittering ice shards that rained across the floor, and the two stone giants fell apart within it. The cold surge hit so hard the land of fire itself felt chill. For a long moment, the battlefield was silent. Every eye turned to Ted. Ron could only gape. Ted gave a shy smile at Dumbledore, who watched him impassively. He felt like the student who just swiped the final blow from under a master's nose, trying to look apologetic and triumphant at once. Back at the temporary camp, the gnomes and demi-humans who hadn't gone underground were exhausted from hauling supplies. Even the gnome-operated magic automata were smoking, and many had broken down. Those who had gone below rose to the surface on brooms and other flying devices once the shaking abated. People asked anxiously as they gathered, "Is it over? Did we win? Is everyone all right?" By the time Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix emerged with Ted and a few students, the sinkhole was empty. A white figure bolted toward Ted, only to be caught in a protective bubble and suspended midair by Dumbledore, without a wand or an incantation. "Misunderstanding! Misunderstanding!" Ted blurted, rushing to smooth things over. "This is my pet, a magical creature, a running horse. Its name is Cabbage." He made up the breed on the spot. People stared. Raising cats and dogs was one thing, but a large white horse? Very refined taste indeed. The bubble popped and Cabbage landed, fuming. "Apologies, I was tense," Dumbledore said quietly. The last battle he'd fought that intense had been decades ago, and he hadn't quite come down from it. Ted waved it off, but Cabbage was indignant. "You old man, do you think you can handle me?" The horse snapped, drawing a long sword with its mouth and brandishing it in a flourish. Its lips and brows twitched with exaggerated arrogance. It was clearly no ordinary horse. "Fancy that! It talks!" Sirius laughed, hugging Ted's shoulder. A talking magical creature was a sign of high intelligence. Dumbledore ignored the horse's taunts and turned back to the sinkhole. They had discussed matters below. The planar gate had been closed, but the deeper problem remained, the underground fire element region, the lava pool. It wasn't just a few pools. Over months, it had begun to erode the crust and spread. The decision was to sink it. As Dumbledore raised his wand, his long white hair and beard lifted as if in wind, and a brilliant blue light surrounded him. He murmured spells they couldn't hear, and the ground began to tremble violently. The shaking lasted nearly 10 minutes until nobody could stand. Then the sinkhole closed, the earth folding over like a pair of hands, burying the chasm. Later, Dumbledore would say he had sunk the lava pool 1,500 meters below the surface. Everyone stood stunned. Within a kilometer radius, there wasn't a blade of grass, only yellow earth and broken stone where the sinkhole had been filled. Cabbage's sword clattered to the ground, and the horse, suddenly modest, hid behind Ted, muttering, "What good is being strong? Out in the world, you need influence." Ron, still slack-jawed, stammered, "Principal, Professor, you're incredible." Cabbage blinked. "Principal?" What happened with the cleanup and the aftermath was handled by the Ministry and the Iron Hammer Fortress. Ted and the others were taken to Sirius's house to recover. Dumbledore and most of the Order didn't linger either. Representatives from the Ministry of Magic and the engineers of Iron Hammer Fortress were already discussing how to handle the site and the aid the Ministry had promised. Just as Dumbledore was preparing to leave, Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, excused herself and called him aside. "Dumbledore, can I have a word?" "Of course," Dumbledore replied. "How have you been these past few years, Bones?" "Managing," Amelia said dryly. "With Minister Fudge, the workload doubles and the efficiency halves." After the pleasantries, she got to the point. "About that student, Ted Epiphany, what exactly is going on with him?" Ted had made a lot of noise. Potions crafted on his own, independent work in alchemy and arrays, leading combined spell work and weather curses controlled in unison, and that final devastating ice seal, Shatter Ice. 99% of adult wizards couldn't do even one of those things. A student doing all of them at once was bound to attract attention. Dumbledore smiled calmly. "Every few years, Hogwarts produces a genius. It's not extraordinary." Amelia studied his face. "If that's how you see it." "Not ordinary, astonishing, even terrifying." Dumbledore, for his part, seemed determined to play down Ted's role. The public display of sinking the sinkhole had the added effect of shifting attention away from the boy. Compared to Dumbledore, Ted was a small wizard, yet those with eyes for talent would recognize his potential. Dumbledore himself found his thoughts drifting inward. During the final Titanic sink, he'd felt something he hadn't in decades, the sensation of breaking through an unseen ceiling. Wizards met limits in this world, an invisible cap on power. Many outstanding mages in history had tried and failed to push past it. Dumbledore had long stopped obsessing over it, having lived with his own failures and faults. For years, he'd been content to coast. But today, something had shifted. In that last spell, he'd pressed against his old limit, and for the first time in a long while, glimpsed the landscape beyond the crack. 231. Loose Ceiling Ding. You have completed the quest. Seal the Planner Passage. Reward, 1,850 XP. Dickamon Reputation, plus 300. Ironhammer Fortress Reputation, 300. British Wizarding Community Reputation, 100. Cards, Underground Lava River. Essence of Flame. Ding, you have completed the major event. Otherworld Infiltration, Land of Fire. Dickamonda Reputation, plus 300. Ironhammer Fortress Reputation, plus 300. British Wizarding Community Reputation, plus 100. Ding, Reputation Module activated. Reputation, Diccamond, Revered. Wizard, plus 50. Hogwarts Student, plus 50. Monster Siege, 100. Explore Anomaly, plus 200. Seal Planner Passage, 300. Major Event, 300 equals 1,000. Ironhammer Fortress, Respected. Wizard, plus 30. Hogwarts Outstanding Student, plus 30. Basilisk Incident, plus 30. Lending a Hand, plus 40. Seal Planner Passage, plus 300. Major Event, plus 300 equals 730. British Wizarding Community, Friendly. Wizard, plus 20. Hogwarts Outstanding Student, plus 30. Secondhand Home, plus 30. Basilisk Incident, plus 40. Seal Planner Passage, plus 100. Major Event, plus 100 equals 320. Goblin Race, Neutral. Wizard, 10. Hogwarts Outstanding Student is minus 20. Goblin Radicals, Disgusted. Wizard, 10. Hogwarts Outstanding Student base 10. Expedition Conflict, 80. Death of Old Goblin DeWatt minus 100 equals minus 200. Ted narrowed his thoughts and pulled the Reputation module into focus. The module summarized how various groups felt about him. Ranges and thresholds were clear. Respected meant 500 to 1,000. Friendly, 200 to 500. Neutral between 200 and minus 200. And disgusted minus 200 to minus 500, which implied they would actively attack if given the chance. So the goblin caravan with ill intent they'd run into earlier belonged to the goblin radicals, and because he had killed their elder, they hated him. If circumstances allowed, they'd come after him. Great, enemies. But no matter. He was a wizard, a Hogwarts student, and an outstanding pupil who'd drawn Dumbledore's attention. Those goblins wouldn't dare confront him openly. Their influence in the magic world was marginal. He'd deal with them later. Lying on the soft, comfortable bed at Sirius's, Ted felt bone-deep tired. Today had been relentless. Still, he used his mind power to sharpen his awareness and began to tally the gains. First, reputation. The Diccamond and Ironhammer Fortress reputations would buy him VIP treatment in those places, and his standing in the British wizarding community had risen too. The sort of notoriety that made life easier. But reputation was only useful at the right level. The real prizes were experience and cards. After clearing the Jackalweir camp earlier, his wizard profession had reached level 8, and he still had about 20,000 XP in the pool. Now another 46,890 XP had been added. School had clearly been a waste if this kept happening. At this rate, he might be sparring with Dumbledore in a few years. A decision loomed. Spend the XP on Wizard or on Mind Mage. Raising Wizard from level 8 to 9 required 36,000 XP. With his 10% talent reduction, that was 32,400. But investing in Mind Mage could net more levels. Level 5, 10,000, plus level 6, 15,000, plus level 7, 21,000, totaled 46,000. Minus 10% would be 41,400. He could jump 3 Mind Mage levels at once. In the end, Ted decided to split the difference. His mind power was finely honed. What it needed was a quantitative leap, but he couldn't risk leveling 3 times at once in Sirius's house and potentially wrecking the place. He planned to return home in the morning, level up once and acclimate for a couple of days, then continue. That would suffice for now. Next, the cards. He already had Hog and the Mist of Fate from before, but the Land of Fire had yielded even more. The quest Explore Mountain Anomaly had rewarded a material card, Mountain Peak, blue, literally a mountain peak. The quest Seal the Planner Passage had given Underground Lava River, blue, another material. Ted mentally toyed with the idea. If you fused a mountain and an underground lava river, you might create a flaming mountain. Beyond those, he'd picked up dozens of fire-related material cards. High Combustion Coal, white. Essence of Flame, green. Blazing Core. Blaze Igniter. Black Iron Ore. over 30 material cards in total, including 8 fire particle alone. He'd also received several equipment cards, some of them surprisingly powerful. Fireproof Cloak, item card. Equipping grants +2 fire resistance. Note, fireproof rating A+. Fire Treading Boots, item card. Equipping grants +1 fire resistance. Flame Jet, when activated, the boots spray flames and allow a charge at extreme speed for 12 seconds. Note, once the jet starts, it cannot be stopped. Do not use in confined spaces. Ring of Flame Energy, item card. Equipping grants +1 fire resistance and +2 fire mastery. Allows the spells Ignite 3 times day, Fire Ring of Repulsion 3 times day, and Rain of Fire once day. Blaze Storm Amulet, item card, can trigger the Blaze Shield spell. Blaze Shield +2 fire resistance, absorbs damage, and causes burn to fizz attackers. When it breaks, it releases a radial flame impact. Item card. Equipping grants +25% magic recovery. Warmth, +75% magic recovery for 3 minutes. Fire Patterned Obsidian Dagger, item card. Physical attacks deal bonus fire damage. Flame Blade ignites the weapon so physical attacks ignore 1 level of magic resistance. Blaze Jet sprays a tongue of flame to strike and burn enemies. Note, use with caution. Playing with fire can have consequences. Orb of Blaze, item card. Equipping grants +3 fire resistance and +3 fire mastery. Permanently grants the Scorching Domain effect, continuously burns enemies within a 50-meter radius. Flame Ray emits many flame rays to automatically attack enemies, dealing double damage to foes with negative effects such as Ignite or Burn. Summon Fire Element summons 2 level 10 fire elements for 5 minutes. Note, made from the core of a magma giant. The quality of the fire element cards made one thing clear. Fire element creatures were much stronger than Jackalware. There were no gray, junk quality results here. Everything had value. He'd also received the quest reward, Essence of Flame. Material card. The concentrated essence of a magma giant containing a large amount of high-quality fire magic, a high-level and very valuable material. He didn't yet know how to use some of the higher-tier materials, but the haul was more than enough. After all, his entire raid had been essentially a freebie, courtesy of Dumbledore. Besides that, Ted had acquired several magical items from the old goblin who'd met an untimely end. He didn't dare to use them yet, or even take them out, fearing they might have been tampered with. His plan was to use alchemy to decompose the items back into base materials. That would remove any hidden charms or corruption. Despite the immediate threat being contained, the Land of Fire incident wasn't over. Though Dumbledore had shut down the planar infiltration and sunk the fire world underground, the local environment had already shifted over several months. Average surface temperatures had risen by 5 or 6 degrees, and underground temperatures were even higher. Those changes would spread and eventually trigger significant consequences. Many creatures had already abandoned their original habitats, been transformed into fire-attributed magical beasts, or undergone fire-based mutations. Vegetation, hydrology, and geography would gradually change. Ecosystems were interconnected, and a small perturbation could cascade into a major transformation. Regions like Dicamond and Iron Hammer Fortress would feel these effects in time, and there was little anyone could do about it. Not even a dozen Dumbledores could reverse the slow creep of environmental change. Dumbledore himself, having long since reached the limits of mastery in this world, had begun to sense those larger shifts Ted didn't yet fully understand. In the days that followed, Ted spent time with Sirius and Lupin. They visited Damocles Belby, the eccentric but kindly inventor of the Wolfsbane potion. Thanks to Ted's persistent persuasion and their prior correspondence, Belby agreed to let them help with his potion research. Lupin would serve as the test subject. The Wolfsbane potion wasn't perfect yet. Belby had planned to keep refining it privately for 2 more years before releasing it, but a combination of funding and pressure convinced him otherwise. The main problem was cost. 1 bottle currently cost 8 galleons. For a werewolf who wanted to control themselves through the full moon, the monthly cost, including labor, would be about 10 galleons, a prohibitive sum for most werewolves who faced severe discrimination and poverty in the magic world. Production was difficult, and success rates for ordinary potion makers were low. Even if someone could pay, they might not find a brewer capable of making it reliably. Belby's friends argued he should publish a workable version and improve it later. With funding from the Black family, Lupin as a volunteer test subject, and Ted helping with research and practical assistance, the project finally had a chance. Ted's participation was a significant help. During this period, Ted also advanced his Mind Mage class. He leveled up 3 times, gaining +2 intelligence, +1 perception, and +3 levels of mind power. The boost to his mind power raised his mental resistance by 2 levels, now at level 5. His growth was substantial. The next steps were becoming clearer. You are a good person. You are a good person. Chapter 231. You are a good person. Hi, Ted. Morning. Morning. Have you eaten, Ted? Not yet. I'm about to. Ted, found anything good lately? Good things happen every day. The main hall at Xianyu website headquarters buzzed as soon as Ted walked in. Everyone greeted him. The atmosphere was almost festive. He felt more popular than ever. The place was filled with laughter and chatter. With his reputation rising after the Land of Fire incident, the effect was obvious. Familiar faces and strangers alike came up to him, made small talk, and invited him to eat. It was the kind of attention reserved for a golden boy. Ron was green with envy when he heard about it. If anyone dared invite him to eat, Ron muttered, he'd teach the young wizard a lesson. It had been a week since the Land of Fire incident. The magic world hadn't made it public, but with a community of 20 to 30,000 wizards who were all connected somehow, secrets don't stay secret. Nearly 100 wizards had taken turns fighting that night, and almost 20 had been injured and hospitalized. Rumors spread. People didn't know the details, but they knew enough. Ted, that promising young wizard, had played a big part and had caught Dumbledore's attention. That alone made people warm toward him. For the past week, Ted had mostly been with Sirius, helping Belle experiment with potions. The first improved potion had finally been released, so they were in a lull. Ted also used the time to level up his Mind Mage class by 3 levels, and the world suddenly felt different. Wizards treated him more kindly, probably because his enhanced mental powers made his charm spells more effective. His companions had benefited too. Little wizards, Ted often said, couldn't grow without experience. Even if his friends had only been background support in the Land of Fire incident, being part of such an event brought rewards. Just yesterday, he'd bumped into Neville at the Leaky Cauldron and found that his warrior profession had leveled to 2. Hermione had written that inspiration had hit her hard over the past 2 days. Great progress on runes and circles. Jerry's spellcraft had improved, and Sherry's stealth and assassination skills had sharpened. Ron, my appetite is better. Ted packed his things and headed to the Leaky Cauldron. Old Tom, how's business? He asked. It's all right, same as always. Going to the Muggle world? Yes, I'm buying something. As a mind mage, Ted knew how to lie with a core of truth. Telling Old Tom he was going to a Muggle store was true technically, but his real purpose was to deliver the new Wolfsbane potion to Remus Lupin. The full moon was approaching. It was time to test the improved brew. Lupin couldn't get steady work in the magic world because of being a werewolf, but he'd made a name for himself as a Muggle detective. Remus Detective Agency? Ted read the sign, stepping out of a taxi in front of an antique market. He'd just come from browsing there. He'd bought some useful items. Lupin's office had no receptionist. Perhaps to avoid exposing himself, he hired no one. Ding, ding, ding. Ted rang the bell. Coming, a familiar female voice answered. Ted? Tonks? Nymphadora Tonks appeared from the back in a Muggle t-shirt and jeans, a file bag slung over her shoulder. What are you doing here? Interning with Mr. Lupin, she said. Ted watched her face. He didn't need to probe her mind to tell something was up. Tonks looked uneasy, but it wasn't his business. Where's Lupin? In the back. Follow me. Lupin hadn't sent Tonks back because they were close. She was making coffee and doing odd jobs while learning the ropes. Ted handed over the improved Wolfsbane potion, and when Tonks returned, they drank coffee and talked. The 3 of them in a Muggle setting felt oddly intimate. Tonks said she was curious about detective work, skills that would help an Auror, so she'd come to learn. Lupin talked about strange cases he'd solved over the years, sometimes slipping into magic when he had no other choice. Ted remembered he still had a quest item with him, Dictu's relic, green. The unlucky Dictu's bones were stashed in his bag. He mentioned it to Lupin, who opened the small wallet and frowned at the vague address. "This isn't very precise, but it's a starting point. I can ask my informants. Give me 3 days." "No need," Ted said, waving his hand. Lupin prided himself on following the rules and avoiding magic in Muggle affairs. Ted didn't care. He pulled out 3 gold coins, St. George slaying the dragon coins minted in 1981. He'd spent over an hour picking them out at the antique market for a reason. 1981 was the year the Harry Potter story began. In occult terms, numbers and dates can carry resonance. The St. George legend of chivalry overcoming a beast, the dragon's blood forming a cross, and St. George becoming Britain's patron saint and emblem had long symbolism that Ted wanted to tap into. Ted set up a quick divination. He laid a map of London on the table with a flick of his wand, emptied a bamboo penholder and dropped the 3 coins inside, then began to rattle the divination sticks while murmuring odd phrases. He pulled a crystal ball from his bag, a natural amethyst, refined with alchemy and runes, at least a green-quality magic item that added +1 to prophecy. He took an old pocket watch, set it by the crystal, put his hand on the sphere, and drew on his magic. Images formed in the ball. A bus drove by. "Bus 642, he muttered. A shop sign appeared. "Jimmy's Chinese Food," a house number flashed. Number A4631. 16 kilometers northeast, near Jimmy's Chinese Food on the 642 route, house A4631, he said, packing up. Lupin and Tonks watched, stunned. It had the eerie certainty of real divination. They followed him. With such clear clues, they reached A4631 in under 2 hours. Tonks and Lupin waited in the car while Ted knocked. He came back out 10 minutes later. "Ma'am, please accept my condolences." He bowed slightly. The woman, middle-aged, eyes red from crying, kept thanking him, saying she didn't know how to repay him. She'd long given up hope of ever finding her loved one. At least now she had confirmation and could bury the remains. Ted's mind power was ridiculous. Not only had he been believed without question, the woman didn't even register his youthful 15 or so appearance as odd. His mental aura filtered out any suspicion and made her trust him like an old friend. Once back in the car, Ted sighed. Lupin and Tonks assumed he was mourning the tragedy. He was actually sighing at himself. The quest reward card had popped into his inventory. Good guy card, green, spell card usage. Increases the target's favorability toward you for 10 minutes. Uses 1-1. Note, you are a good person. Ted stared at it. Good deeds rewarded? What on earth did I do it for? Create life. Create life. Ted had done a good deed and banked a little karma. The reward card at the end had a delicious irony to it, but at least the prophecy ability he envisioned worked. He already had first-level prophecy, the crystal ball had added another, and the Eastern Taoist divination technique lent a third-level prophecy in total. Divining the future for a fairly ordinary Muggle woman was easy peasy. In the days that followed, Ted handed the Shanyu website over to Sirius and his team to manage and kept himself scarce. It was better to lie low. Being greeted everywhere he went made him feel like a celebrity, and a wizard should speak with magic, not live like Gilderoy Lockhart. You could say the professors had taught by example. Ted took up permanent residence in the Leaky Cauldron's basement and even expanded the space by enchantment. He had turned it into an alchemy lab. He'd originally intended to use the Xianyu site to collect materials for hatching a dragon egg, but while he hadn't yet gathered everything for that project, he had stumbled on a far rarer find, an alchemical manuscript, the Emerald Tablet, annotated by Sir Isaac Newton. Newton might be remembered by Muggles as a physicist, but in his later years he sank into alchemy. These were his notes, 20 years of observations and marginalia. Alchemy's roots stretched back to Ptolemaic Egypt in the 3rd century BC, to the legend of Hermes and the so-called Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet wasn't a recipe book so much as a high-level philosophical manifesto, like the art of war for a different craft. Beyond literal transmutation of base metals into gold, alchemists historically pursued 3 other ambitions: immortality, a universal cure, a panacea, and the creation of homunculi, artificial life. Gold, immortality, and a cure-all. Irresistible goals. Nicholas Flamel had achieved part of one. His elixir extended life, but didn't halt aging. Ted had read the gossip on the Xianyu forums that Flamel planned to destroy the Philosopher's Stone and accept the death that was long overdue. After 6 centuries, life had become a burden. The Philosopher's Stone also edges toward panacea-like effects, which is why it could produce an elixir of life. Homunculi, though that was where the stories crossed into outright blasphemy. Some of the rumors claimed human essence and horse manure and beakers stuffed inside a horse's belly, practices that sounded less like science and more like cultish horror. Ted wanted nothing to do with that. His ambition was simpler. On the shelf beside him were the books he'd collected: Exploring Ancient Alchemy, Secrets in the Flames, a banned goblin treatise on smelting and enchantments, Alchemy, Rectified, Perfected, and Augmented, a 17th century work that reads like the prototype of modern alchemy and even lists 7 methods for making a scrying mirror, and back issues of the alchemical periodical equivalent exchange. He'd acquired a lot through Sirius's old pureblood contacts. Some books were scarce because today's wizards simply didn't practice alchemy as their ancestors had. Ted had also started producing his own creations. He repaired a dilapidated vanishing cabinet, portal-style furnishings that linked 2 places, and resurrected a heavily damaged pensieve that had been passed around Diagon Alley for decades. Wizards with genuine alchemical and magical craft skills were a dying breed. Every broken artifact left a hole in the magical world. Modern alchemy had slid into pragmatism and lost some of its breadth. Muggle physics and chemistry, freed from the need to account for magic, had learned to transmute elements in their own way. Bombarding mercury into gold is possible, albeit prohibitively expensive. Scientists had done transmutation experiments in the 20th century, creating vanishingly tiny amounts of gold from heavier elements. The trick cost more energy and money than the gold was worth, but it proved the principle. Wizards, meanwhile, couldn't even manage a Midas touch. Ted knew plenty of alchemical theory and a few cheats from other worlds. The transmutation circle from Full Metal Alchemist made a cameo in his notes, but he still lacked the last key to open any mythical gate of truth. That didn't stop him from being productive. In just over a week, he made a new magical item, the communication book. A sheet of enchanted parchment that mirrors whatever is written on one copy to the copies held by others, instant text communication across the wizarding network. It was basically a magical QQ. His friends all had terminals now. They no longer needed owls or the Ansu service for quick messages. Ted was already dreaming about voice and video versions, but his main project at the moment was to create life, not the grotesque homunculi of rumor, but slimes. Slimes were perfect, simple, almost like gigantic single-celled organisms or fungal colonies. Ted had the Otherworld knowledge entry, Otherworld reincarnated slime, green, and had memorized it better than the slimes did. He even had a recipe, ridiculous as it sounded. Gelatin, 30 grams, a fat-free high-protein base, water, 10 milliliters, oxygen, 1 standard atmosphere, ammonia, 6 grams, lime, 5 grams, phosphorus, 2 grams, salt, 1 gram, saltpeter, 1 gram, zinc, 0.8 grams, fluorine, 0.4 grams, iron, 0.5 grams, silicon, 0.03 grams, experience points, 300, life particle, 100 units. Organizing the recipe left him bemused. On paper, it read like kitchen chemistry. Throw some gelatin and a scrap of silicon steel into a drain, and you'd probably get a poop slime. Ted found that prospect amusing, but he was careful. He ran experiment after experiment in the safety of his expanded basement lab. The failures outnumbered the successes, but each attempt taught him something. Progress, incremental and maddening, was still progress. He thought of Paracelsus and von Hohenheim, the great names of alchemical legend, the supposed creators of homunculi, and the origin stories behind the magician in the tarot and other myths. The Full Metal Alchemist versions were wild analogues of those legends. Ted wanted none of that mythic horror. He wanted manageable, controllable life, slimes that could be studied, cataloged, and maybe, just maybe, used to help with mundane tasks around the leaky cauldron. Ted was gleeful, obsessive, and single-minded. He found inspiration where he could. Question Quirrell, learn from Quirrell, become Quirrell, surpass Quirrell. 234. Slime and August Otherworld knowledge. Goo-goo-goo-goo-roo. Inside a transparent, round-bellied flask, a pale green, jelly-like blob the size of a baby's fist trembled and made faint gurgling noises. It had 2 tiny mung-bean eyes and nothing else, just a lump of jelly with eyes. Still, it showed emotion, faint and simple like that of a low animal. Ted could even detect spirit fluctuations. It had a soul, consciousness, spirit. It was alive. I did it. Huh, I did it. Ah, I did it. Ted held the flask up and laughed at the ceiling. 12 experiments, finally, a living slime. Ha! After he'd laughed himself out, he glanced back at the flask. Wait, what? The jelly in the flask was melting into a thick, soupy mess. Holy crap, what's happening? Did it die? Ted stared, baffled. How could it die? Was his method still flawed? It shouldn't be. Parker, great master, I'm here. Parker creaked as he shuffled over. Replay everything that just happened. Parker's crystal body projected the last moments onto the wall like a hollow. Ted watched it several times. When he had been laughing, the slime inside the bottle had begun to tremble violently, then given a sudden twitch and slowly melted away. What happened? Was it attacked by something invisible? Ted demanded. Parker chimed. Congratulations, Master. Congratulations. Your great master's evil laughter scared the tiny slime to death. After running through the experiments, Ted had to accept it. The newborn slime was so timid that sudden, loud laughter scared it to death. It wasn't that his laugh was uniquely terrifying. The slime was simply unbearably frail. Loud noises, harsh light, even a small temperature change could kill it. He couldn't help but think, what else can I do with a slime like this? He had to be patient. Slimes could grow quickly if fed properly, and courage rose with size. The next day, the slime died again, this time from contaminated aspergillus. It couldn't even handle common mold. Ted labeled it in his notes as slime softy. Level 1, note, will die if too cold, will die if too hot, will die if hungry, may die if overfed, may die from stomach upset. Extremely fragile, vulnerable to bacteria and fungi. Fortunately, after Ted adjusted the feeding formula, the newborn gained an antibiotic effect. Basically, he added a simple antimicrobial regimen. Ted grinned. I'm a genius. Within 3 days, his slime had grown to the size of a human head. It still had no combat power, but it could survive. Softy followed Parker everywhere like a little dog and was poked fun at by Ansu. It dared not approach Chicken Bro, arrogant, bad-tempered, and prone to melodrama, but it got along with Rat Brother. Best of all, it couldn't talk. Otherwise, it might have started calling him Big Brother. Despite the rocky start, Ted felt proud. He hadn't just modified a creature, he'd created life. A very weak soul was brewing that was arguably more valuable than tweaking larger magical beasts. Studying the notes Professor Quirrell and Slytherin left him had given Ted an epiphany, too. He'd collected a number of magical creatures over the past days to test his ideas and to raise the kinds of creatures he wanted. Ding! Talent, Otherworld Knowledge, triggered, discovered, Healer Hero Job Guidebook, green. The little green guidebook explained how to become a healer hero and detailed several important abilities. It required 260 experience points to exchange. Ted felt a little disappointed. Green quality, only 260 XP. Not very powerful, but healer hero? Sounds like it might suit Neville. Ted spent the experience and opened the book. With his current mind mage level, he absorbed new knowledge quickly. It took just over a minute to scan the whole thing. Wait! Ted's eyes widened. The core ability, bodily fluids? More precisely, the guidebook suggested that magical power could be increased through the exchange of bodily fluids, and that such exchanges could heal physical injuries and even mental or spiritual wounds. He glanced up and muttered, "Is this a healer pervert?" It was bizarre. He decided not to dwell on it. This wasn't something you mastered overnight, and there were more pressing projects. He returned to the incubators. 2 heavily pregnant creatures waited. A plump-bellied Diracol and a likewise swollen Kneasel. He stroked their heads, satisfied. You've worked hard, very successful. This time he had done modulation at the fertilized egg stage, creating what he hoped would become an entirely new species rather than a simple modification like Chicken Bro. A week later, the pups and kittens were strong enough to scamper about. Ted contacted friends through the communicator. Neville, the pet I promised you is ready. Come pick it up. Hermione, I got a kitten for you. When can you come get it? Ted's grand plan was to create Pokémon by modifying magical creatures. The project was going smoothly so far. The black and white pup that chased its tail and darted around with bright eyes was Iroquois Border Collie Cross. Ted had poured a lot of wind and fire magic into the mother during gestation, consuming plentiful resources. He was aiming to create Pokémon, Arcanine. How much magic such newborns would inherit and what abilities they'd end up with would come down to luck. He'd only obtained the female Dirical and other animals through connections. Sirius and Arthur Weasley had helped, and his elevated status certainly opened doors. Otherwise, he never would have gotten those specimens. Any wizard wishing to keep a Dirical must pass a license from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and owners are legally required to painlessly remove the Dirical's peculiar tail with a cutting curse at 6 to 8 weeks to avoid drawing Muggle attention. Ted had used contacts to acquire his Dirical. Lupin had helped him find a purebred border collie from Muggle nobility. The Kneazle he bought from a reputable pet shop. Kneazles are essentially magical cats, speckled fur, outsized ears, and a lion-like tail with a tuft. Once a Kneazle bonds with a wizard, it's an outstanding companion. They're intelligent, solitary, and sometimes aggressive. Kneazles can keenly sense untrustworthy people and can lead a lost owner home. The Ministry classifies purebred Kneazles as XXXX because of occasional aggression toward humans. A Kneazle litter can reach 8 kittens, and they can interbreed with ordinary cats. Kneazle whiskers can be used as wand cores, though their magic isn't especially strong. Because Kneazle magic was relatively weak, Ted chose a civet cat as the male parent. Civet cats are employed as guards by the French Ministry of Magic and have a defensive duplication ability. The more they are attacked, the more duplicates they produce. To secure suitable breeding stock, Ted spent 80 galleons on connections and even went to France. During spell work, he also added whiskers from a leopard cat. There happened to be a leopard cat in the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid was on good terms with it, and Ted traded a 1-meter bluefin tuna for 2 whiskers, hoping they would lend a bit of edge to the newborns. Hermione arrived at the leaky cauldron. Ted was momentarily stunned when he saw her. "Hermione, what happened to you?" She touched her face and gave a shy smile. "We went on a trip." She and her family had spent the summer on the beaches in France. She was incredibly tanned. Just then, Neville stepped in from the fireplace, a smudge of soot on his nose. "Neville, Hermione, you're here! Come on, quick!" Ted hurried them down into the basement. The place was chaos. A little puppy was batting a blob of slime around like a ball, nudging it with its nose, sprinting ahead to catch it, then nudging it back again. The slime's tiny green bean eyes practically spun in delight. A kitten was clumsily chasing Rat Brother, and Chicken Bro, Ansu, and Cabbage were popping in and out, making the whole scene a riot. Ted explained as he shepherded them in. "I have to use Oxio and Reparo several times a day. Please take them away quickly." The puppy was black and white, medium-length fur, ears already perked, lively, bright-eyed, absurdly clever. It read faces, flattered Big Boss Ansu, and generally charmed everyone. Neville was instantly smitten, standing there with a silly grin. The kitten was different. It could stand on 2 legs. Its forepaws looked almost like hands, with 5 flexible digits instead of normal cat claws, and a small golden protrusion sat on its forehead like a galleon. Ted admitted he'd tried to create something new, an Iluro-like cat, something between a magical cat and a muggle creature, so he'd added 2 leopard cat whiskers and a galleon into the spell. In appearance, at least, it succeeded. The kitten looked more magical than the puppy. It was greedy for shiny things, too. Ted would put a galleon in a bottle, and the kitten would hug it and gnaw on it all day, practically wanting to crawl inside. "Katie's the mother," Ted said. "She's a Krupp. The Longbottoms have plenty of space, so Neville can keep the dog. But you don't have to worry about raising another female cat. The kitten's mother rejected it." Caddy had nursed the kitten for a week, then grew uncomfortable with its strange appearance and refused to continue. Ted gave Caddy to Mr. Giggs. Parker took the kitten and bottle-fed it, using a bit of psychic heat to warm goat's milk until it was weaned. When Hermione heard the way the mother had reacted, sympathy pulled at her, but she didn't let Ted off the hook. "So what exactly are you doing, Ted?" He hushed her with a conspiratorial smile. Don't worry, I'll tell you everything. We'll talk slowly later. I've got a new ability too. I'll show you when I can. He handed each of them a small vial. Here, this is an insect repellent potion. It keeps flobberworms away. They like to parasitize fur. Ted only began noticing these details once he'd started keeping animals. Flobberworms were tiny crab-like parasites with long fangs, only about 1/20th of an inch long, and attracted to magic. They loved the fur of krups and the feathers of auguries. Left unchecked, they could spoil magical items, gnaw at wand cores, feast on potion residue in cauldrons, and, in muggle households, would wreck electrical appliances from the inside. For severe infestations, the Pest Advisory Bureau at the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures had to be called in. A flobberworm gorged on magical substances could grow from a millimeter to the size of a fist. Ted had even tried feeding one to Slime. Fortunately, Slime would eat almost anything. Neville left through the fireplace, taking Katie and the puppy, named Diddy. Hermione took a car. As she was about to go, Ted slipped a small box to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Pearl cream," he said proudly. It had been an accidental product. While delivering potions to Lupin, Ted had met the owner of a pearl farm, one of Lupin's clients who'd been investigating his wife's affair, and bought a quantity of imperfect, artificially cultivated pearls. Pearls, despite wizarding assumptions, could be cultured, and powdered pearl made a decent spell component. Ted used the surplus defective powder to develop a cosmetic potion, Pearl Cream. It lightened skin, reduced scars, and tightened pores. Several women who tried it praised it, and after a month's use, results were obvious, the skin's renewal cycle being 28 days. "Try it," Ted said. "This'll be in salons next week. It won't be cheap. The Longbottoms, the Blacks, Mr. Giggs, even Iron Hammer Fortress and Dickamonde have shares." He was quietly building a network, uniting people by shared interests. Ted chuckled and added, "Ron tried some. He stole Ginny's, actually. It worked too well. His skin changed so much we couldn't hide it." Hermione smiled despite herself, accepting the box. They parted on good terms, and she drove off. By late August, Ted was checking the Xianyu website for any news about his egg-hatching materials. 4 items were still missing. Such things turned up by chance, if at all. At Secondhand Home that evening, the regulars were gathered, drinking and arguing. A recent Ministry of Magic notice, the Guidelines on Excessive Dragon Product Prices, had set everyone talking. Dragons were mostly farmed now, and nearly every part of a dragon had use. Dragon hide gloves, dragon blood, scales, and teeth. Even dragon dung made excellent fertilizer. Dragons supplied a steady stream of medium to high-end materials that the magical community relied on. Yet in the last 3 weeks, dragon product prices had shot up, on average quadrupling or quintupling. Workshops were suffering, raw material costs had run away, and businesses couldn't keep up. The ministry had issued its guidelines, but people said the words were empty. Prices kept rising. "They say price rises are market law, but price cuts are illegal," one wizard scoffed. "What nonsense." "Isn't the ministry bullying honest traders?" another demanded. "Are we supposed to accept being exploited?" Someone else pointed out, "The ministry owns most of the dragon farms. They're both referee and player." Ted rolled his eyes. It's the clash between people's growing intelligence and officials' falling morality, and the ministry's the biggest beneficiary of dragon products. "Exactly," someone agreed. "They've issued every statement except lowering prices. I'll stop buying until things change. I won't die without dragonhide, will I?" They kept arguing, the same bitter conversation that had by then become familiar. Ted listened and sipped his drink, thinking about missing materials and new creations, about a tiny kitten with a galleon on its forehead, about pearl cream and a market he was slowly learning to navigate. 236. Ahead, Hermione and Neville loved the pets they'd been given. Neville's large manor was perfect for the puppy Didi, who ran herself ragged, panting after just one lap. The food was excellent, and there were plenty of big meaty bones. She chewed so hard that her milk teeth were almost falling out. At Hermione's, the little kitten Meow Meow was thriving as well, mostly because it was an expert at ingratiating itself. The moment it arrived, it found the family's boss and began rubbing against Mrs. Granger's legs. It even helped with chores. When Mrs. Granger mopped the floor, the kitten would fetch the towel, perfectly understanding how to please people. Now its status in the household was even higher than Hermione's father's. That little creature, whether by accident of Ted's magic or not, had an astonishing appetite for money. Within a week at Hermione's, it had collected a small fortune in coins. Hermione swore it counted them every night, but having only learned to count to 10, it never managed to get the total right. Whenever Ansu came by to deliver things, he would secretly swipe a coin and the kitten wouldn't notice. Ted woke up a little late that morning. He'd been up late the night before, experimenting with Softy. By the time he had breakfast at the Leaky Cauldron, past 9, the place already had a steady clientele. The early morning regulars were heavy drinkers, but polite, glasses raised and greeting him as he came in. After a quick meal, Ted planned to go to Secondhand Home to see whether Parker had learned anything useful and to check on the supplies he needed. 2 days earlier, he'd received another set of materials for hatching eggs, given free of charge by someone who insisted it was out of respect for the Black family and wanted to be friends with Ted. The giver's child was in 6th year at Hogwarts and hoped Ted would look after them, a relationship investment, Ted thought, and acceptable. Alchemy materials were complicated, and the Xianyu website had been a huge help. Without it, sourcing ingredients for experiments would have been a nightmare. Ted believed the magical world needed change and circulation. His path, he was convinced, wasn't wrong. Lost in thought as he walked, Ted suddenly sensed he was being watched. Now an intermediate to advanced mind mage, he was adept at perceiving other people's attention. He glanced casually and only saw half a body before the person slipped out of sight around a corner. Even that half view was enough. Ted's mind filled the rest of the street like a three-dimensional map. Visualizing the faint silhouette was easy. It was Ron. "Why is he hiding from me?" Ted muttered. "Did he feel guilty about something? Did he wrong me? Ansu, Ansu." Ansu landed silently on Ted's shoulder. "What's up? Go over and take a look. Be careful not to be seen. See what Ron's up to." "Peeping? I love it. Leave it to me." The mischievous raven blurred and vanished. Wizards on the street never noticed Ansu land or take off. Mind power at work, the neglect spell. Instincts simply ignored him. There was nothing to find in anyone's memory of him afterwards. Through Ansu's eyes, Ted watched what was happening. Ron was on a date. The girl was Lavender Brown from Gryffindor, the same Lavender who had been petrified by the basilisk last year and who'd chatted with Ron at the school hospital. She was also Harry's roommate. No wonder Ron was hiding. Ted couldn't help grinning. Ron's face looked fairer, and his freckles had vanished. Apparently, he'd been using a lot of pearl cream. Betraying the revolution with beauty cream, huh? Ted thought, amused. But it was a date, and he wouldn't disturb them. He let Ansu watch a while longer, and then kept walking towards Secondhand Home. When he arrived, the place was packed. Old friends sat in corners drinking and eating, while nearly 200 people, wizards, a few dwarves, gnomes, even some half-humans, had filled the room. 2 days ago, Ted had left one of his small inventions at Secondhand Home to see if anyone would like it. It had been a hit. People crowded around him, pleading, "Ted, when does the magic movie start? Hurry up. I've waited so long my flowers have withered. My hair's falling out from waiting. I can't sleep if I don't see the magic movie now. I feel like ants are crawling all over me. Save me. Let me see it one more time, please." Parker's projection charm could replay recent events nearby, and Ted had modified the spell into a proper magical projector. The device could play moving images, and films were easy to come by. No Muggle studios knocking on his door for royalties. "What do you want to watch?" Ted asked, and a chorus of answers surged up around him. Calm down. I've got plenty today. We'll do them one by one. Don't push," Ted warned. Dobby, the house elf who'd taken a waiter's uniform at Secondhand Home, shrieked cheerfully, "Those who want to watch the movie, come with me to the second-floor cinema. Watch your step. Don't push. Mind your manners." Dobby had been working there 2 months and had gained confidence. His uniform was ironed each day, every crease in place, like a proper British butler. Once Dobby shepherded 150 or so people upstairs, the ground floor quieted. The ones left behind were older wizards who'd come to catch up with friends over a drink. They weren't interested in a moving, talking picture. "Isn't it just a longer, talking, moving picture?" "Nothing special," they grumbled. Sometimes the hardest part is getting people to break through that last thin layer of skepticism, and Ted had just cleared the worst of it. He started scrolling through the day's listings, processing information fast, thanks to his sharp mind and quick reactions. Then he paused and scrolled back. "What's this?" he asked. Jerry came over to look. "It's a clay head. Someone listed it this morning. No one recognized it." "Where is it? Take me to see it." Ted's tone had tightened. Jerry led him to the back storeroom. On a shelf sat the clay head from the listing. It was unmistakable, a terracotta figure's head, central Chinese features, a top knot slightly askew, a small painted mustache. Ted stared, unblinking. "This is a terracotta army head." "Who would steal something like that?" Jerry asked, bewildered. He hadn't realized what it was. Ted didn't have time to explain. He needed to know who'd put it up for sale. "A middle-aged wizard," Jerry said. Shifty-looking, thinning hair, thin and small, deep wrinkles, seemed like his first time at second-hand home. He didn't look like he trusted us much. He said he'd try it out and then left. I heard he came from Nocturne Alley. Nocturne Alley. Ted didn't waste words. "Keep an eye on the shop. I'm gonna find him." Ted slipped the terracotta head into his coat pocket and hurried out, heading towards Nocturne Alley to find out who had brought a piece of another country so carelessly into the open. The changes Ted had brought to the magic world were starting to show. The biggest differences were secondhand home and the Xianyu website. Though the shop itself was small, it was always busy. The exchange of information and magical items through Xianyu website injected new life into Diagon Alley. If anyone tracked it closely, they'd see Diagon Alley's GDP rise by 25% in the last 2 months. Many shopkeepers felt business was improving without realizing the traffic was coming from secondhand home. Nocturne Alley benefited even more. Those who operate in the gray zones between lawful and illicit tend to react fastest to change. They're well-informed, have keen instincts, and adapt quickly. The flood of customers attracted by secondhand home didn't stop at Diagon Alley. It radiated into nearby Nocturne Alley. Nocturne wasn't only full of dark wizards. Much of it was a gray market where uncommon, legally dubious items changed hands. That ambiguity meant aurors rarely bothered with a full sweep, and black market activity thrived under the surface. There had even been a major smuggling incident before school began last year. Sentient creatures from other worlds were trafficked in, went berserk, and slaughtered many. The ministry swept the area then, but once the raid ended, the shops were still there and the bosses still alive. Business continued. With so many people, new buyers and sellers arrived. Nocturne's gains dwarfed Diagon Alley's. Within 2 months, the alley's reputation had spread, drawing dark wizards from France, Germany, and beyond to buy and sell goods they couldn't move on legitimate markets. That's how unusual items, like that head, ended up in circulation. Ted had to find out where it came from. With the head in his possession, tracking the source was much easier. Black market operators hid well, but they weren't a match for Ted. He combined divination with psionic mind power to trace faint traces in the air. He followed a thin yellow line that no one else could see. Near Nocturne Alley, he found a side corner, cast an invisibility cloak to hide his approach, and used psionic energy to alter his appearance. Ordinary wizards can't change their looks without high-level transfiguration. Ted's transfiguration wasn't that advanced, but his psionic disguise did the job. Moments later, a tall, slender white man in his 20s walked into Nocturne Alley, an appearance that belonged to his disguise. The man was a middleman named Sherman, a wizard from Eastern Europe. He'd once had a thriving business and a happy family, but the collapse of the Soviet Union had destroyed everything. In the Soviet era, wizards answered to the Red Magic Committee. When that government disintegrated, chaos engulfed everyone. Eastern Europe was in turmoil for a year. Many wizards were killed, and werewolves took advantage of the disorder to attack both muggles and wizards while everyone scattered. By the time things calmed, the world had changed. Sherman's supply chains were gone, his routes and buyers lost. He'd traveled to the Far East, risking his life to meet smugglers who dealt in Eastern magical artifacts. But stranded wizards were cheap prey, and his goods were grossly undervalued. He'd hauled them all the way west, only to get offers that wouldn't even buy him a month's bread. He'd finally heard about a Xianyu website that could move strange items and come to London hoping to sell, only to be left with one unsold object, the terracotta head he'd prized. Other dealers bought the stone and jade figurines, but rejected the terracotta, claiming it showed no magic. Sherman couldn't bear to discard it, so he tried the website. Now that head was in Ted's hands, Ted slipped in silently and subdued Sherman, placing a hand on the man's temple. Using language and mind power, he guided the middleman's memories to trace the origin and destination of the terracotta pieces. There had been 3 terracotta figures in the shipment. The clay one now missing its body and appearing only as a head, a stone figure missing an arm, and a jade figure intact. The stone and jade had been taken by Borgin and Burks. Ha, Ted muttered, then blurred parts of Sherman's recollection. Sherman was a small-time middleman trying to survive. He didn't need his route traced back to the Far East. Ted wiped enough that Sherman would no longer remember traveling east, made it look like he'd simply dozed off, and left him slumped over a chair as if asleep. Borgin and Burks would need some preparation. The last time he'd taken advantage of chaos to hit their business, their defenses had been strengthened. He'd watched the shop from a distance, but had never felt confident enough to act. This time, he'd prepare. Outside, a few old witches tried to push forbidden potions on him as he left Nocturne Alley. The vials looked cheap and dangerous, addictive, poisonous if overused. One tried to grope him. Ted gave a furious glare that scattered them. Eye contact was an excellent way to use mind power, and it was broad daylight, so he restrained himself from more violent persuasion. The witches fled, muttering. He'd planned to find a quiet alley to shed his disguise when a familiar presence pulled him up short. Hermione was running towards second-hand home in her robes, excitement written across her face. School was nearly in session, and she was out shopping. She suddenly sensed him, glanced in his direction, then kept walking. After a few steps, she stopped, turned back with a frown as if something felt wrong, and then saw him. She hurried straight over, and without much ceremony, grabbed his sleeve. "Ted?" He shifted his voice with psionic energy. "What? Who are you looking for? You've got the wrong person." Hermione didn't let go. "Are you still trying to fool me? I'd recognize you even if you turned to ash." Her glare was fierce. There was something of Professor McGonagall in the way she scowled, quick to anger in defense of what she cared about. Ted sighed. Okay, wait while I change back." A moment later, they were sitting inside secondhand home. "What were you doing dressed like that?" Hermione asked. "Buying things." It wasn't convenient to be seen. He kept his voice casual. "Be careful. You're a celebrity now. If people notice you, it'll cause trouble." Got it, Hermione said, easing up. Then she brandished the money in her hand like a prize, 5 10-pound notes. "I'm out shopping. Did your dad win the lottery like Mr. Weasley?" "What?" Ted blinked. "It's nearly school time. Dad gave me money to buy an early birthday present." Chapter 238, Lost and Found Cat. Hermione's birthday was on September 19th, and school started on the 1st, so she was bound to celebrate at school. Mr. and Mrs. Granger decided to let her buy her own present early. "So it wasn't a lottery win after all," Ted joked. Ted had even tried to divine lottery numbers, but his power wasn't up to the task. Even a small prize would have required a level 5 prophecy, he estimated. Meanwhile, Mr. Weasley had won the Daily Prophet's 700 galleon grand prize, practically a windfall. They had planned to go to Egypt to visit Bill after the Land of Fire incident, but Bill had been working overtime and said it wasn't safe, something about mummies, so they'd canceled. Hopefully the family would be able to save a little money this year. Ted went shopping with Hermione. She had thought about buying a pet for herself, but Ted had already given her one, so she'd abandoned that plan. Browsing the shop, she hesitated. So many of her friends didn't have pets. "Ron has Scabbers, and Neville and I both have pets you gave us," she said. "Why don't I buy a pet for Jerry and Harry?" Ted frowned. "Forget Jerry. I asked him. He says he's barely getting by and doesn't want the responsibility of a pet." "All right then, let's pick one for Harry." They pushed open the pet shop door and were hit by the animal smell. Ugh! Both of them cast the bubble head charm at once. John, slacking off again?" Ted called. John, dust on his face and a feather in his hair, looked up from wrestling a stubborn jewel lizard into a cage. "Oh, Ted, you're here?" He struggled to secure the lizard, which clung to the bars with all its claws. With a casual spell from Ted, it went limp and John shoved it in. "You wouldn't believe it. My boss got a shipment of magical creatures, and most of them aren't tamed. I'm going mad." "We're here to help," Hermione said. "We want to get a pet for a friend." "Pick whatever you like," John said, already waving them toward the back. The front of the shop displayed the usual domestic animals: rats, turtles, cats, dogs, and a few stranger things: a fist-sized cockroach, spiders bigger than a hand, bright little snakes, and a macaw doing gymnastics on a perch. The place felt like a small zoo. Hermione wandered, overwhelmed by choices. Just as Ted was about to ask what Harry liked, an orange-yellow, flat-faced half-Kneasel sauntered over and mewed at them. Ted's heart gave a little leap. Crookshanks. The cat's squashed-in face matched the pictures he remembered. He nudged Hermione. "What about this one?" Hermione hesitated, embarrassed to say it out loud. "It's not exactly pretty." Ted grinned. "Maybe, but you can't judge a cat by its looks. If anything, it has character. Look at it. If it came over to us when you were choosing a pet for Harry, maybe it's meant to be." Persuaded, Hermione agreed. She bargained fiercely and got John down from 7 galleons to 4. John protested. He'd had the cat a long time, but at last relented. "Fine. Take it. I'll even throw in a blanket." On the way back to Grimmauld Place, Ted explained what he planned to give his friends soon. A new invention. He'd improved the old two-way mirrors, the ones wizards used for long-distance visions, by using alchemy to extend their range from 50 to 500 kilometers, covering the British Isles. He'd also added anti-interference and arcane mark encryption, so the mirrors would work even where there was magical protection. The core trick was transfiguration, worked at a high level. Ted loved tinkering. He liked to joke. He knew the principle of nuclear fission too, and might try it if he could find the right materials. At 12 Grimmauld Place, Sirius was startled when he saw the cat. Its face was so distinctive he recognized it at once. Rummaging through old photographs, he found a family picture of baby Harry, less than a year old, with a tiny cat sitting beside him. Lily had written then about Harry loving the toy broom Sirius had sent and poking the cat with it. Sirius smiled and felt a stab of sadness remembering the way things had been before the war. In the chaos after Voldemort's attack, no one had time for a cat, and it had ended up unsold in a shop. Now it had come back. They decided to call it Crookshanks, the name Hermione gave it. No one could remember its original name. Crookshanks, cradled in Harry's arms, nuzzled his face as if saying, "You used to poke me with a toy broom when you were little." After seeing Hermione home, Ted began preparing for the night's operation. Later that evening, a fierce magic battle broke out in Nocturne Alley. A dark wizard had attacked Borgin and Burks, sealed the back door with magic, and trapped the owner inside, then looted the shop of dark artifacts. Before leaving, the attacker set the place on fire with a twisted version of a fire spell, nearly burning Borgin and Burks alive. The shopkeeper, shaken and badly burned in pride and goods if not in body, offered a 500 galleon reward for whoever captured the culprit. Nocturne Alley was full of bounty hunters and shady sorts, but no one wanted to risk life and limb for so little. Ted had meant only to recover the national treasures. The moment he stepped into Borgin and Burks, though, he realized taking only the 2 terracotta figures would be a dead giveaway. If he left the rest intact, the authorities would guess his target. Better to make it look like a general theft. Take more, leave less. Besides, dangerous dark artifacts shouldn't remain in a shop like this. So he emptied the place. Borgin and Burks had an astonishing amount of merchandise. Ted's large, extra-dimensional bag bulged. Protective wards and dark arts defenses littered the shelves, but he didn't bother trying subtlety. He used overwhelming destructive magic, explosions where necessary, acid spray on items he couldn't carry, and fire where something simply had to be erased. Before leaving, he lobbed a final fireball to make sure nothing useful remained for anyone else. As he packed, the system chimed in cheerfully. "Ding! You have completed a deliberate robbery. You gained 264 experience points." Ted muttered to himself. He hadn't really had a choice before, but now he wanted to be a better person. Besides, how could that be called robbery? He was acting on behalf of heaven. robbing the rich to protect the innocent, upholding justice. Merlin himself would have approved. He examined the two terracotta soldiers with interest. Whoever had supplied Borgin and Burke's had an eye for rare things. These weren't mere statues. They were magical puppets, animated constructs created by an unfamiliar technique. Their mechanics were different from Western constructs. Their way of channeling magic into motion had research value. Ted had the odd sense they were related to puppetry techniques he'd seen in other worlds, Naruto's puppet jutsu, Sekiro's prosthetic innovations, though he didn't have time to puzzle it out. School started in 2 days. Ted compressed his haul into his space bag, restored the bar's basement to its original state, and set secondhand home up for daily management under Dobby's supervision. He left instructions with Sirius and arranged for Mrs. Longbottom to be on call as backup. Then he headed to the train station. Luggage shrunk to the size of a fist and tucked into a pocket. On the platform, the system pinged again. Ding, talent, otherworld knowledge, gold, triggered. Discovered, fire-breathing basic method, green. The fire-breathing basic method was a breathing discipline developed specifically for blood-sucking species and related techniques. It required experience to exchange, just over 200 points. Ted compared it to the Hero of Healing program. The hero skill was more advanced, involving professions and magic, while the fire-breathing method was closer to internal cultivation. Still, it was useful. It could slowly improve strength, constitution, and agility. A free ability to strengthen the body was nothing to scoff at, so he spent the experience he'd earned, of course, on behalf of Heaven, and unlocked the method. It would take time to train, but it was worth it. By the time Ted boarded the Hogwarts Express, his gear was sorted and his new breathing exercises already rolling through his head. The carriage was crowded. Hermione kept glancing at the door until she saw Neville and Harry climb aboard. She relaxed visibly. "At least no one's missing this year," she murmured, still haunted by last summer's flying car fiasco. 6 friends squeezed into a compartment along with an assortment of animals. 2 cats, 1 dog, 1 rat, and a raven. Crookshanks and Meow Meow immediately zeroed in on Scabbers. The rat let out a terrified squeak and dove into Ron's sleeve, nearly disappearing down his pants before Ron managed to wrestle him back into safety. After subduing the cats and calming Scabbers, Ron was in unusually high spirits. He'd become a little fairer, a bit softer. His family had been spending a lot since Mr. Weasley had won a prize, and Ron had been enjoying the spoils. There was also the matter of Lavender. Everyone noticed the change. "Friends, how was your holiday?" Ron asked, grinning as if he'd swallowed sunshine. Hermione and Jerry exchanged a look. They both suspected something was up with Ron. Ted introduced them to his latest pet, Softy, a bouncy, squeezable little creature that everyone thought was oddly delightful. The twins, George and Fred, had been oddly secretive during the break. Ron mentioned it. "Do you know what the Weasley twins are up to?" he asked Ted. "They were weird all holiday, always sneaking around." "They're pranksters," Harry said, unconcerned. "They're always making gadgets." "I know them," Ron insisted. "If they made something new, they'd show me or get me to test it. This time they were hiding it. I remember they said they had something important when we first met at Diagon Alley. Ted, do you know anything?" Ted's answer was on his tongue. He'd heard the twins had been experimenting with a stand-user concept, a bizarre but brilliant idea. But before he could speak, the train lurched violently. A loud crash shook the carriage. Squeals and screams cut through the compartment. Everyone's hands went for wands. Years of adventures had trained them well. Several protective wards flared into life around the group. Ted pressed his forehead to the window. Outside, 5 or 6 witches and wizards on flying brooms were engaged in a frantic chase. Behind them trailed a dozen or more black, ragged shapes. Ahead of them, a dark-robed figure rode a huge bird. Spells flashed between the two pursing parties. The broom riders carried wands. The dark-robed pursuers made gestures and used materials, not wands. Then Ted realized what the black shapes were. Dementors. 3 of them had lost the chase and hung back, beginning to drift over the train, drawn by the strong, bright emotions inside. The Hogwarts Express, already slowing for some reason, shuddered under an unseen strike, and the driver eased the speed further. "Dementors!" someone shouted. Panic rippled through the carriage. Ted's mind raced. Dementors fed on happiness and hope. Azkaban prisoners had only scraps to offer. The sight of a whole carriage packed with teenagers was like a feast. "Other spells won't work," someone cried. "Use Patronus." Ted yanked off his robes, grabbed his wand, and pushed open the compartment door. "Protect the others," he called back. "I'll hold them off." 240. Dementor. Addictive. Take 2 sips. Screech. The train braked sharply. Steel wheels shrieked against the rails. The younger students were caught off guard and curled into terrified balls. Ted and the others were steady. Neville, quick on his feet, reached out in time and hauled Ron and Harry to safety. Ted grabbed Hermione as she stumbled, and Jerry clung to the luggage rack. Ted yanked the compartment door open and raced out. Older students in neighboring compartments reacted even faster, flinging their doors wide to see what was happening. "Don't come out! Hide! Dementors!" Ted shouted, sprinting down the corridor. Many children from wizarding families stiffened for a heartbeat at the word Dementors. Their faces went pale. These creatures were the Ministry's ultimate threat to misbehaving kids. Mess up and we'll send you to Azkaban to get the Dementor's kiss. Upper years protect the lower years. Those who can. Ted swallowed the last part of the sentence, not daring to say the spell aloud. The Patronus charm was advanced magic, and Hogwarts didn't teach it to everyone. He couldn't count on anyone here knowing it. The train door was still far away. Ted didn't wait. He flicked his wand and sent a mage hand smashing through the compartment window, then vaulted out. He rolled on the muddy ground to absorb the impact. When he looked up, he froze. There were only 2 Dementors nearby. A dozen meters above the roof, other Dementors hovered, circling and hesitating, but down here only 2 had come close. One was already diving straight for him. Dementors moved oddly, weightless and rag-like, drifting like tatters. "Ice arrow rain!" Ted shouted and flicked his wand. Dozens of small, pale blue ice arrows flew upward. They passed through the 2 Dementors as if they were fog, drawing off only a little of that black vapor before dissipating. Useless. The handbook he had glanced at in the carriage made more sense now. Dementors were created ages ago by a dark wizard and were immune to most magic. Only the Ministry had some way to control them. That's why they were kept at Azkaban as guards. Ted's ice arrows only made them pause. In the 2 seconds of that misfire, the nearest Dementor was already 2 or 3 meters away. It reached out a gray, withered hand, almost 2 meters tall, draped in black rags and smoke. Where a face should be there was only a circular black mouth, ready to suck out happiness. Dementors fed on the positive emotions of sentient beings. If they ate too much from one person, that person would be left hollow and empty. If Dementors went too long without food, they starved. The Ministry kept them fed and controlled for that reason. Now, seeing this carriage full of terrified children, one of them had slithered away from the pack for a private feast. "Evil protection!" Ted stamped his foot. A luminous ward burst outward, an anti-evil array. The Dementor nearest him recoiled as if struck and bounced backward. The other one seemed to smolder and was flung aside, reluctant to approach. The ward made them visibly uncomfortable. They circled at a careful distance, about 20 meters away, the exact radius of Ted's level 5 evil protection. It worked. Dementors might be immune to most magic, but they were, undeniably, evil, and a protective charm designed to counter evil had real effect. Relieved, Ted tried everything he could think of: fire, acid, mage hand, volleys of physical arrows. The Dementors didn't bother to dodge. Flames did the slightest damage, but most spells slid through them harmlessly. He tried a mind spike, his mental energy forming a spike to pierce their consciousness. It made one of them shudder and slow down, but that was all. Mind-affecting magic that could fell fragile minds scarcely registered on these things. They felt less like minds and more like rudimentary hunger. Ted cursed softly and kept testing them, trying to learn their weaknesses. If Voldemort would later use Dementors as shock troops, he wanted to know what could stop them. A scream cut through the corridor, sudden and high. Ted's heart dropped. He'd forgotten one. Less than a minute earlier, while 2 Dementors had descended on Ted, another, bolder and greedier, had slipped down a different side of the train. A compartment window had been open only 10 centimeters. The boneless, rag-like thing had squeezed through and flowed in. Three second-year students didn't even have time to cry out before despair washed over them. In 10 seconds, the Dementor had hollowed them out. They collapsed, icy and unconscious. The creature didn't bother finishing them clean. There were richer, fresher victims ahead. It yanked a compartment door open with its oversized claw and flowed into the corridor. Passengers in the next compartment shivered as the cold rolled past them, and then 3 more were drained. Only when the Dementor reached a compartment with 4 fifth-years did real screaming break out. This compartment was right next to Ted's. The cries drew Harry and Hermione awake. Harry was the first out of his compartment, fearful but faster than his fear. He had to protect the others. He saw an older student stumble from a compartment toward him. A terrifying claw shot out and seized the boy by the collar. The Dementor lifted him, turned him face to face, and sucked. A pale, mist-like essence flew from the student's mouth and nostrils into the Dementor's black void. Harry shouted and raised his wand. Evil Protec. He choked off the last syllable as the Dementor turned toward him. Its effect hit like a physical blow. Harry's whole spirit felt dragged into a cold, lightless place, silent and utterly hopeless. Images crowded him, a chorus of curses, a man chanting a spell, a woman screaming. It was unbearable. Stupefy, a voice barked from behind the Dementor, but the stunning spell struck as if hitting a curtain of nothing. Magic, for the moment, seemed to have no purchase on it. Malfoy sprang forward, teeth clenched, trying to grapple the thing, but his arms passed through it as through smoke. At some point, Harry had gone limp and collapsed. Malfoy turned and planted himself between the Dementor and Harry, wand ready. The creature opened its gaping mouth and sucked. Malfoy went rigid, kneeling, shivering, his teeth chattering, eyes wide and fixed. He was reliving the first time he'd faced the diary, deceived and left to die in the Chamber of Secrets. He felt helpless, and, through that haze, he knew dimly that Harry had saved him then. Though it felt like death, he was aware enough to act. Trembling, he reached out, pushing himself between Harry and the Dementor. "Get lost, you ugly monster," he spat, voice hoarse. Even on the verge of fainting, stubborn Malfoy could still find the strength to sneer. Thanks to fellow readers, East Sea Ranger and Sky and Earth Guardian Knight for the 100-point reward. Thank you.